The story began with one of the largest networks of computer clubs. A place of heated battles and debates among young and rambunctious minds, two of them were passionately discussing their favorite game, Dungeon Maker. Just after its expansion was released, one famous player had already taken first place in the walkthrough rankings. The result was so impressive that Kang Chu was suspected of cheating, as was always the case with mundane players incapable of achieving such results. They had no idea that the subject of their gossip was standing behind them, quietly munching on a fried meat stick. His neighbor also heard that conversation and grinned, looking at the secretive hero who was not looking for glory. He asked him why the guy always ate fast food if he earned so much. The food was simply delicious, Kang Chu answered him. He was not looking for other reasons. All he cared about was the game. The guy was sure that next time he would also take first place, and he didn't notice how this upset others because everything came to him as if without much effort, as if he really was a bot. In a way, they were right, Kan thought. Bot or not, he was just having fun creating maps in the game world. Now his victories no longer looked like some incredible achievement. The guy simply possessed information that others did not. His whole life flowed through the reflection of the monitor in his eyes. Kan said goodbye to his impudent friend, who made him promise to eat well at his expense next time. The hero's image was simple. A sweatshirt, sweatpants, and flip-flops on bare feet, the obligatory attribute of an invincible man. Like all ordinary guys, this one was obsessed with games because there was nothing in the real world he could control. In games, he could alter reality at his own discretion. A couple of clicks of the mouse, and you, like a magician, change the color, shape of any object. That's what he was thinking when he was just crossing the road and suddenly heard the screeching of brakes. In a game, you can change everything with a couple of clicks of the mouse. But in real life, you can't just take a truck rushing towards you and move it aside. The guy was so stunned that he froze in place like a hare in front of a boa constrictor and simply waited to die. But at the last moment, the truck braked right in front of his nose, and all the will he had just written and the regrets about not clearing his browser history became meaningless. The driver leaned out of the window and cursed the guy with the choice language of truck drivers for wandering around in an unknown place. With an impassive gaze, Kan pointed toward the traffic light, which was green. And so he learned the life lesson that even being right 100 times over guarantees your complete safety. The driver, seeing his mistake, looked dumbfounded at the green light. But he could have gotten one of the most famous cliches with the hero's teleportation. It would just happen a little later. But for now, Kan walked further down the street, indignant at how little he could change in life, and that in games, everything was more convenient. If he had the power, he would have created a dream world. And then the steel beam that was being lifted by the crane, as if he heard the hero's call, broke the cable. Kan, his adrenaline still pumping and his senses heightened by the impact with the truck, noticed this. He also noticed the little girl standing right where the heavy object had fallen. Gravity makes no exception for little girls who suddenly find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time, simply because unscrupulous builders violated safety regulations and installed a crane incorrectly. And now this load has fallen beyond the fenced area, confirming that stupidity and carelessness are deadly. There was a terrible crash, but just before she fell, a strong hand managed to push the girl to the side. Player Kan used the only thing he could control in the real world, his body, and change the world as best he could. In a normal story, everything would have ended there, but for a real hero, everything was just beginning, and perhaps everything he saw before him was a fantasy of his brain, beating in agony, which, realizing that it was dying, eased the pain with an illusion. The world disappeared. The pain went away. Kan was simply falling into the void, but he was no longer afraid. He knew that he was already dead. It was a very strange realization, knowing that you were dead, and at the same time continuing to think as if you were alive. And then the darkness spoke to him. "Welcome to reality," said a voice that sent shivers down his spine. How he screamed in horror, asking the darkness who he was and what kind of hellish oblivion this was. "Death is only the path to rebirth," answered the voice in the darkness. "He has only one chance to remember everything," something said as it approached him. The guy still didn't understand anything and began to wave his arms in an attempt to get out of this nightmare. And then he felt as if he was being pushed out. And then Kan opened his eyes and jumped up with a scream, squinting his eyes in pain, because he was not yet accustomed to the bright light. He stood alone in the middle of a strange room, like something out of a themed cafe, with antique furniture and wax candles, and he didn't understand anything at all. Looking around, he saw a stone vault, heavy wooden beams, gray granite walls. It was definitely a castle, thought Kan. There was no mirror at hand, but there was a window. In the dim light, the guy saw a reflection, but it was not his face, and his body and his clothes also looked strange. To make sure he wasn't imagining things, Khan looked at his hands with their obsidian-sharp nails and skin of an ash-gray alien hue. A different body, and it felt different. Even if you read about this in 100 stories, you will still be in deep shock if you yourself are suddenly reborn in another world. Even illusions have their limits. If you have a healthy brain, you can easily distinguish reality from fiction. Other creatures would not have missed the selection, so Khan quickly realized that he was not sleeping. But the more he learned, the more questions he had about who he was and where he was. However, instead of answers, Khan received 3 spans of sharpened steel in his back and experienced an indescribable sensation of penetration. He stared in horror at the blade protruding from his chest, his whole body numb with pain. Some crazy girl took her weapon back in one movement, which spoke of her monstrous physical strength, despite her thin appearance. She was clearly enjoying the experience and asked him with interest if the wound was fatal, as if it required further explanation. It was unlikely that Khan could answer her anything. He was staring at the hole in his chest and the red fountain. He had just arrived in this world and was ready to jump further. Only one ridiculous question arose in his head. Why? The yellow-amber eyes looked at him with childish innocence and purity, as if it was some kind of prank. But the protruding horns and mad grin spoke more of madness. If you hate someone, you try to get rid of them, she said matter-of-factly, and swung her sword again. For the first time, Khan felt animal fear, because they were actually trying to kill him. Perhaps this would have happened, but then someone knocked the blade out of the madwoman's hand, and it clanged as it hit the floor. Another noble-looking horned man entered the hall, holding a long striped whip like the tail of some strange beast. The madwoman called him Termy, and apparently this wasn't the first time he'd gotten involved in their squabbles. "This is not the way to treat brothers," he scolded Zelda. That was apparently the name of the madwoman who had attacked Khan, and took a bottle with a lid out of his pocket. Who were all these people spinning around in Khan's head? Somehow miraculously he still hadn't lost consciousness. Termy sat down next to his brother and addressed him affectionately by name, Kella, taking pity on the younger one, who was being bullied by his sister, and gave him a potion to drink. Healing potions are common in fantasy worlds, and Khan, in her naivety, thought this was one of them. In his desperate situation, he was willing to cling to anything. His brother chuckled sarcastically, as if amazed by his naivety. He couldn't believe his eyes that Kella had simply taken and drunk the potion, because instead of having a healing effect, it burned Khan's insides as if molten tin had been poured down his throat, and he immediately threw it all up. Now, in addition to the hole in his body, he was tormented by the hellish pain of the burnt lining of his esophagus. He might as well have drunk acid. Never try this at home. Sheldera leaned over him and realized with regret that her older brother had just deprived her of the pleasure of finishing everything with her own hands. But Termy was more skeptical. The test of the deadly potion had failed. The recipe caused pain, but nothing more. Having just found himself in another world, Khan had no idea why he was suffering. The hall doors opened, and a herald announced the arrival of His Majesty the Demon King. Hal Calden had returned from his hero hunt. The elder brother and sister stood to greet their father. Khan mentally shuddered, imagining what the father of these 2 fiends of hell would be like, who had treated him like that. Bull horns, long pointed ears, a stern look that looked out from eyes outlined with charcoal eyeliner. This was King Hal. Tall and stately, he asked in a loud voice that sounded more like a roar why he was hearing the annoying noise again. Seldere didn't have the sense to remain silent, and she immediately began to snitch, placing all the blame on her younger brother. But it seemed that in their family the father had the same reverent attitude towards the children that they had towards each other, because Calden immediately grabbed both of them. The groan of weaklings in the castle of the Demon King. "It's a disgrace," the father growled. Termy almost choked, begging his father to have mercy on them this time. Here, Khan quickly calculated his genealogy and realized that he had become the son of the Demon King in this world. The boy didn't know what to expect from such a parent, and then became wary when he met his gaze. The great and terrible Hal, whose armor design was inspired by a comic book, declared that he only wanted to hear 2 sounds in his house and raised his leg. The first was the sound of the birth of a great demon, heard by the stunned guy. And the second, the sound of a noble death, said the loving father, and lowered his foot in a forged boot. Satisfied with his work as a mentor to the rascals, Hal Calden went off to rest, leaving the friendly trio lying on the floor. Khan himself did not understand why he was still alive with such wounds and poisoning. But perhaps it had something to do with the fact that he was reborn as a junior prince in the demon kingdom. All he could do was swear. Couldn't they have found anyone better, thought Khan, who was clearly not thrilled with the place he had ended up in. In Call's memories, such family relationships lasted for as long as he could remember. One day, Seldera threw a fork in his eye, and he came to his mother crying. This woman was the most beautiful in the demon realm, and her voice sounded welcoming and gentle. She was the only one the boy could come to for comfort, since Termi had again put something nasty in his food. With a gentle smile, the mother told the boy that when he grows up, he must definitely take revenge, as is customary among demons. Kella was afraid of retaliation. He was afraid that they would simply take his life. "You have to be faster than your enemies," the mother said without any pity, as if she were talking about taking away a stuffed toy. Before becoming the great demon king, Hal Calden killed 12 of his brothers, all out of great brotherly love, she said. So the boy should act the same way because he is younger and weaker. And then she showed him how to wield the dagger with a steady hand and drove it into the hilt. A different country, a different culture, customs that might seem brutal to a civilized earthling were par for the course in the demon kingdom. From childhood, his mother, with a gentle smile, instilled in her son insensitivity to pain and the correct behavior model, because only in this way could Kella survive. Of course, back then he was still just a child and didn't understand it. Can woke up screaming again, his rebirth becoming more and more like a nightmare in which it was impossible for a normal person to live without going crazy. Next to him stood a maid. Judging by her modest and meek appearance, she was somewhat similar to his mother and asked about the master's well-being. Khan was still reeling from the memories of Kel Kalden. He examined his body and discovered that his wounds, fatal for an ordinary person, had completely healed. It was precisely thanks to this regeneration that the special culture of demons had been built. Kella inherited these incredible abilities from his father. The maid turned away in embarrassment and said that the young gentleman had slept for quite a long time. The family dinner was coming up soon, so it was time for him to get dressed. Her name was Rin, a girl with the meekness of a sparrow, small and modest, but very sweet, which is probably why Kella valued her more than others. But her meekness and modesty were entirely ostentatious. In reality, the impudent servant took advantage of her master's shyness. She refused to help him with clothes and avoided such work in every possible way. She even forced the young gentleman to make her bed, although it was her job. On top of that, she often slept on Call's bed when he wasn't around. Because of his shyness, Kella never outgrew his childhood complexes, so he allowed the servants to ignore the son of the Demon King. Khan was only surprised by such carelessness, but in some ways he sympathized with this lonely demon. Call had been bullied since childhood, and it was difficult to spread one's wings in such conditions. There was something in their lives that was common to both of them, and Khan clenched his fists. Weaklings always die. Having plucked up his courage, he came into the dining room and tried to act natural. The king immediately noticed his lateness for dinner and gave him a stern look. The very presence of this demon inspired fear and horror. It seemed he could pierce without a sword. Khan apologized and took his seat, where the soup had already cooled down and smelled strange. As a greeting, the boy immediately received a knife from his sister as soon as he took his seat. It took an effort not to squeal like a pig, otherwise Hal himself would have executed him on the spot. With a sweet smile, Selder wished him to eat more, as his face was too pale from anemia. Khan was well aware that if the family found out that the real Kella was gone, something terrible would be done to him. That's why he didn't show it and thanked his sister for the extra cutlery. A minor wound wasn't dangerous anyway, the guy decided, since he could heal even a hole in the body. However, as soon as he tried the soup, which had been waiting for its owner for too long, Khan felt what mercury, arsenic, and potassium cyanide tasted like. He must have suffered the same fate as Rasputin, the boy thought. A soup prepared according to a loving brother's recipe, with a little seasoning thanks to such experiments. Call's liver was able to break down almost any toxin. So Khan responded to this with courtesy as well, and he spent all his energy trying not to show that anything strange was happening. Being a time traveler is not easy. Whether it is the human world or the demon world, it is like being on another planet. Everything will seem unusual under the watchful eyes of the Khan family. He continued his dinner. But unlike Kel, he felt no affection for the demon family, and therefore had no intention of enduring their humiliation any longer. All his life, he wanted to achieve something on his own. And thanks to his unusual thinking, he became the most powerful dungeon creator in the game. But in real life, everything was far from as rosy as we would have liked. While Call's father simply believed he was strengthening his children's character for their survival, Khan's father was simply taking out his anger and dissatisfaction with life on him. Now that life was in the past, ending in a ridiculous accident, but at least for a moment, Khan felt like a hero. Fate gave him a second chance. It threw him into this world so that he could change something. This thought gave the guy determination and firmness, so he decided to pay back the offenders in the same coin. And the first thing he did was throw a plate with more poison than food right into Selder's face. He returned his sister's poignant gift to his brother, giving each of them a new experience in their lives. This change attracted the attention of the king, who was usually indifferent to their quarrels, and he raised his gaze from his plate. "There is no need for demons to pretend to be a loving family. It is better to eat separately," shouted Khan, and turned the table upside down. Seldira hissed like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. Her brother was amazed by such a rebuff. Demons or not, Khan had no intention of giving up so easily. After a hearty lunch, he went out to get some fresh air and take a stroll around the king's estate. The mood was excellent, and Khan did not hide it. Even Rin behaved more reservedly than usual, noticing the changes in her master. Of course, Khan himself received a pedagogical beating from his father for overturning the table and ruining the food. But the broken ribs quickly healed. Even lungs pierced by bone fragments and a torn spleen were quickly restored without any surgical intervention. This incredible power confirmed that he was the son of the Demon King, or at least Wolverine. Khan really wanted to test himself, to understand the limits of his insane, yet incredibly precise regeneration. I, on the other hand, was curious to know whether another demon would grow from his severed finger. Rin reminded him that the demonic energy class was about to start, and he barked impatiently at her not to dare tell him what to do. The maid turned whiter than snow and couldn't think of anything to say in response, so she decided to remain silent just in case. And Khan was able to calmly think about what to do next. Judging by Kel's memories, the demonic energy class was the worst test of his life. But there was no apparent reason to skip it, so Khan still went to class, unlike his brother and sister. For the lesson, it was necessary to change into a different uniform, the purpose of which could only be guessed at. As Kel's memories returned to him, Khan already knew the demons that stood nearby. Of course, they also took advantage of his shyness and the adult's indulgence. That's why the not-so-talented and cowardly Kella constantly received a dose of pain and humiliation at every lesson. His rival really enjoyed mocking him, and it was all fun for them. But the emotional wounds hurt even more, because they could not be healed, which is perhaps why Kella eventually gave up his place. All demons equally despised weaklings. They were raised in constant conflict, which is why each of them had a hard character. Even within the family circle, there was no protection. Kella was alone against the whole world. Moreover, Selder was more worried about the fact that her brother was being treated too softly, and she ordered the instigators not to hold back and to show everything they were capable of. Of course, no one would ever refuse the princess's praise, and so the weak and harmless demon began to be beaten even more severely. Kella wasn't a weakling in the full sense of the word. He was simply born with a personality that abhorred violence, but now Khan was in his place. He had a similar personal experience and learned to cope with it in his life. So for the first time, one could see the malicious grin of a just hero on his face. The professor finished the roll call and asked the student who fought in the last lesson. One of the bullies immediately casually slapped Khan on the chest and said that it was them. And then he sarcastically apologized for not addressing the prince properly. Khan understood everything and barely restrained himself from immediately punching the impudent fellow in the face. The professor ordered them to have another fight. Perhaps he also enjoyed watching the beatings, or he thought that Kella suffered from a lack of experience. The red-haired demon immediately revealed energy blades around his hands. The name Rudd suited his appearance perfectly, and the other students encouraged him not to break the prince too much. Khan again felt how connected and similar his and Kella's destinies were. At school, Khan was also an outcast, and his classmates avoided him. He was not rich, he had no physical strength, everyone looked down on him. But all these days were in the past, and unexpectedly for everyone, the prince was enveloped in the light of power. The mighty stream pressed with such force that even Rudd recoiled in horror. The harmless puppy Kalla suddenly bared his fangs, mana gushing out of him like a geyser. The pressure alone left Rudd unable to move and numb. Khan advised the red-haired demon to clench his teeth tighter and promised that he would only hit him once because he was kind. The forces of goodness folded up ore in an instant and compacted it into the ground, without even having to dig a hole. The rest of the demons suddenly became unsure of themselves and no longer so formidable. The professor, who had been watching students being bullied for years, was also stunned by what was happening. That's how, with one movement, the red-haired hooligan's horns were broken off, leaving a couple of gaps in his teeth. Can immediately reminded him of the lesson in palace etiquette, and that one should not address a prince of the blood by his first name. Rudd had learned his lesson, so he mumbled his apologies through his broken jaw, spitting out fragments of teeth. Finally, Khan warned with a furious look that there would be no second lesson in politeness. The remaining demons quickly decided to learn from the mistakes of others. They still did not understand how this had happened, and whispered in horror. When the boy turned to the teacher, he flinched in surprise, and then Can suggested that he continue the lesson, and looked at the professor with an expression that made his guts tie into knots. All this time, Rin silently watched the young master, whom she knew better than anyone else. There was clearly something wrong with him, she decided, assuming that he had been given rabies poison or something else. These changes did not escape the notice of the Demon King, who silently watched the younger prince from the window of his office in the tower. Termi and Caldera took a bath together without any embarrassment. The sister was furious about having poison thrown at her, and her brother advised her to cool her ardor and focus on recovery. Unlike Call, she did not possess devilish regeneration. This was one of the reasons why Caldera hated her younger brother. She thought it was unfair that such a gift was given only to him. But now the younger one has changed, Termi said coldly. For just a moment, Termi saw his father smile for the first time. This shocked him much more than anything else. The sister could no longer sit quietly in the bathroom and jumped up in hysterics upon hearing about her father's smile. In matters of succession, family feelings disappear, and each of them felt pressure from their more talented, albeit weaker, brother. Caldera returned to the font and asked Termi what he proposed to do about it. And then the brother, with a malicious grin, suggested that they first deal with the youngest, and only then with each other. Both understood that this shaky alliance could end in betrayal at any convenient moment, but Selder agreed nonetheless. Together they decided to solve their common problem before the youngest one attracted his father's attention again. At that moment, Khan felt a chill creep across his skin, as if a bony death with a scythe were stalking nearby. They returned to the classroom, where the next lesson was taking place, and they could see with their own eyes the face of a terrible and bloodthirsty demon, although such a description was unnecessary because all demons were terrible and bloodthirsty. Before them was the former Demon King, Turk Kaldun, whose youthful appearance was far more ferocious than his current successor. Curved sharp horns, a forked tongue like a snake, fangs like a crocodile, a demon in a word. The most powerful demon that ever lived. He fell as a result of a conspiracy by the Heavenly Guild. Since then, the enemies of neighboring kingdoms have been sharpening their teeth against demons. These people held a special place in Call's memory. For hours he looked into the distance from the window of his tower, thinking about how he couldn't escape. Death awaited him everywhere, but among people it was quick, and among demons it was slow. The thought that he would have to sit in the castle his whole life made him feel sad. The people led by the Heavenly Guild were always ready to invade their kingdom. Therefore, it was the duty of every demon to put all their efforts into training and help King Hal win. After class, Can climbed the tower again and looked into the distance. He urgently needed to find a way out of the castle. According to Rin, the battle could begin in 3 days. Here Can jumped to his feet at the very edge of the stone parapet and said that the castle had a weak spot. Among the king's extensive retinue, there was no cartographer who could help make use of the terrain. The abandoned territories around the kingdom played into the hands of the human army. That's why the guy decided to spend his free time putting all these lands on the map. So he planned to help his father destroy every single enemy and escape at the same time. That's why Khan ordered Rin to quickly set up an office for him in the castle's dungeon. And she screamed in surprise. The young gentleman demanded a room where he could work in secret from his father. King Kaldan was busy recovering from his campaign, and as usual, he sat with a stern expression on his face. He was deeply concerned about the recent changes that had occurred with his youngest son, and the king intended to check everything. When Khan saw what Rin had found for him, his cheerful mood completely evaporated. The room turned out to be some kind of storage room, and did not at all meet the expectations of the young heir. Khan scolded the maid for such a mistake and did not accept any excuses, although she even shed a tear to move him to pity. Now he tried to treat her as harshly as possible in order to change the stereotype about the prince's weakness. Along with her fear, Rin's suspicions grew that the gentleman in front of her was not at all the one she knew. However, at the same time, other feelings awakened within her. She liked this version of the ruler much more, perhaps due to the cultural peculiarities of the demon people. To keep the maid busy, Khan immediately sent her for coffee, and she rushed to the kitchen like an arrow. All the boy needed was to be left alone at last, and this was the perfect place. Unfolding the scroll with the ancient map in front of him, Khan immediately realized that things were bad for the demons. But he had to work with what he had, and he immediately began creating a new map. As Rin rushed to complete the errand, she suddenly realized that she had no idea about coffee. Unfortunately, at that moment, the running servant was ambushed by King Kalden, who knew how to walk stealthily, so that not a single mouse could hear, and he immediately asked Rin what she was doing there alone. The king demanded that he be given the location of the youngest heir, and then Rin demonstrated that it was impossible to go on reconnaissance with her. She began to stutter, clearly making it clear that she was hiding something, although she could have simply lied, shifting all the responsibility onto the prince, and thus buying time. While he was working and making calculations, Khan had no idea that he was already in big trouble. So far, he thought he was lucky. This world is very similar to a game. Nothing brought the guy as much pleasure as creating maps, so he completely dove into the work, forgetting about everything else. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door so loud that it flew off its hinges. The king, who was brought by an unreliable servant, was furious that the young prince had taken such liberties and had not notified him. Khan gritted his teeth, caught off guard, and quickly thought about what to say to Kaldan. But the king was not inclined to talk. Instead, he decided to see what the prince was made of with his own hands. It is not proper for demons to weave conspiracies. If the boy plans to overthrow the king, it is better to do it with dignity face to face, Kaldan declared. Khan vomited a red fountain. He could hardly speak, feeling how his father's hand was examining his insides, making sure everything was in place. The pain was hellish. Such was the power of the demon king that from this wound alone, Khan almost lost consciousness. Then he decided to fix everything immediately and showed his father the map he had been working on. The king did not even think of letting him go, but demanded an explanation. Fighting against the human guilds in the castle's vicinity is extremely disadvantageous, Khan said. Therefore, it was necessary to change their defensive strategy and build new fortifications. This would help them in future battles. Kaldan let him go, but still did not fully believe the heir's words. Why did he need secrecy? He asked. Khan understood that if he said directly that he wanted to help the king, he would never agree, for reasons of principle. Therefore, he decided that he would tell the king everything when he had thoroughly prepared his idea for fortifications. After all, as the son of the demon king, he wanted to make every effort and help with the destruction of heaven. But Khan kept silent about the fact that all this was necessary for his personal escape. Rin was horrified by such bold speeches of her young master. But suddenly, Kaldan moderated his anger to mere rage and asked how many days the prince would need to complete his work. This was good news for Khan, meaning that Kaldan accepted his idea, and then he asked the king for 5 days. The enemy could approach their lands in 3, Kaldan replied disappointedly. In that case, the map will be useless, he said and turned away. But Khan immediately corrected himself and the king that he would need not 5 days but 5 hours. This made Kaldan raise an eyebrow in surprise. Although what a schoolboy in an alien world could come up with in 5 hours that demons hadn't thought of in centuries was a mystery. Khan confidently stated that they would be able to complete all the work to strengthen the defense in the remaining 3 days, and he asked to be put in charge of implementing this plan. Kaldan turned away, clearly bursting with pride for his son, but he didn't want to show it, so as not to spoil him. But he warned that if all this turned out to be empty chatter, he would be torn apart along with his ridiculous cards. Only now did Khan remember the pain that was tearing him apart from the inside and immediately fell to his knees. Another red fountain burst out of it. In such circumstances, even with regeneration, it would have been difficult to finish the job. The demons were striking in their disregard for pain and death, and Khan still couldn't comprehend that the king was actually ready to kill the prince for any mistake. Thanks to this torment, however, his authority in Rin's eyes grew many times over, because the guy had just convinced the demon king himself. Fortunately, after 5 hours, Khan came to his senses and even managed to finish work on the map on time. All available hands began to build barricades around the castle at his direction. The magicians had to hide the traces of their preparations using illusion spells, thus preparing a trap for their enemies. It all reminded Kanu very much of the in-game map-making that made him so famous in real life. However, it was not possible to completely hide the preparations in the camp of the Heavenly Guild. The commander had already reported this. So far, the scouts have only noticed that the demons were using illusion magic on the area. However, people did not yet understand what the enemies were preparing, and they considered options for how to thwart their plans. But the commander rejected this idea and ordered that nothing be done. All the same, this could not help the demons in any way, because soon, Talui's strongest attachment, Talcon, would arrive at their camp. This unit began to form decades ago, and now it has finally reached its full strength, as intended. In just 3 days, The enemies still wouldn't be able to do anything to defeat the elite combat unit, the gray-haired human commander confidently believed. The elite squad rode wyverns, allowing them to operate throughout the Empire. They were a flying guard and posed a terrible threat to the demons. Keldon must be destroyed, their captain declared, and the demon race that had ruled here for 1,000 years would finally die out. In general, friendship and understanding reigned among the peoples, despite their different species affiliations. They all did the same thing as other developed peoples, collectively destroying their neighbors. One red-haired girl who accompanied her general admired Kilman. The soldiers in her ground guard unit were nervous before the battle and asked Cirrus if they would lose the battle. The fire warrior approved of the soldiers and said with a smile that they were all different from other guilds, and they would do everything to ensure the demon fell. Keldon sat on his throne in thought. He had barely slept in the last few days and was also preparing for the decisive battle. Kella did a good job, but it had to be admitted the map wasn't perfect. At the same time, the king had no time left for these trifles. His body had already reached its limit. After many battles, the end was approaching. Thanks to the magicians, in 3 days the demons managed to erect serious obstacles in the path of the united army of people. Both slaves and warriors worked tirelessly, risking being completely exhausted by the time of battle. Khan personally monitored the progress of the work and was pleased with its progress. Of course, everything was very different from creating maps in the game. It's amazing that it was even possible to change the terrain so quickly here. The battle between heaven and hell will soon begin, and everyone will be engaged in good old-fashioned slaughter of each other, as befits rational beings. Kan waited impatiently for tomorrow with bated breath. On the day of the battle, General Talcon arrived at the camp, and immediately the fighting spirit of the human army rose. They were ready to follow their commander to his death. The camp commander personally came out to greet Talcon, and they exchanged pleasantries. Now it was possible to immediately move towards the demon castle. After giving a short speech, Talcon looked around at his army and proclaimed a battle cry that echoed through the ranks of people. But this was not destined to happen. Right in front of them, a drop of dense mana fell from the sky and began to slowly spread out to the sides like resin. Talcon immediately realized what was happening and shouted to the others that their camp was being invaded. Before the soldiers could take up defensive positions, an explosion occurred and chaos ensued. And then, right in front of them, a terrifying shadow appeared from the smoke and shadow. Sharp bull horns, a stern, withering gaze, Hal Calden came personally to honor his guests. Before the attack, Khan removed the barrier that focused Heaven's observation magic on the demon castle. Thanks to this, the king could use the teleportation skill unnoticed. Landing right in the center of the enemy camp, the idea sounded as crazy as it actually was, but the Demon King liked it. Zelda tried to object, saying that this was outright suicide. Even Termi agreed with his sister for once, but the father only gave them an icy look for questioning the Demon King's power. Ashamed by such a murderous look, they tried to justify themselves by saying that their father had not yet fully recovered. But Hal Calden remained adamant and stated that he made his own decisions. He himself invaded the heavenly base to wipe out all the pathetic humans. The demon's blue flame surrounded Hal, making him look like a blazing fire of purgatory. Talcon shouted at the enemy that he would regret his decision, after which, waving his staff, he ordered all troops to go on the offensive. The battlefield was filled with the roar of explosions, which echoed off the nearby mountains and merged into a continuous cannonade. The sky was lit up with flashes of magic as Khan watched the battle from a high tower. Below, the entire demon army had already formed up ready to attack, while the people were distracted by the sudden appearance of Caladan. Once the preparations were complete, Khan gave the demon a parting speech, something about love for the homeland and hatred of the invaders, and ordered them to attack. It didn't take long to stir up the demons. They were naturally inclined to war, so they growled bloodthirstily in response, and the valley filled with their angry cries. The people in the camp saw that the army of demons was moving towards them and moved to the front lines of defense. But at the crucial moment, the enemies seemed to appear from underground and mixed up the people's orders. Khan's trap worked, and the guy was glad that so far everything was going according to plan. If your army is inferior in strength, you need to resort to cunning to defeat the enemy in parts. But Khan himself had enemies not only outside the castle but also inside, and his loving relatives decided to take advantage of his father's absence and resolve the issue of succession right now. Termi attacked first and wished his brother a good journey to the next world. His flexible whip, reminiscent of a snake's spine, bit into Kanu's stomach, poisoning him with a new venom. The poison had a paralyzing effect, against which even Kel's regeneration was poorly able to cope. and Seldera rushed towards him to finish what she had started with her blade. In one blow, she severed his head and it rolled like a football. Both loving relatives grinned joyfully. Their shaky union had achieved its goal. Sometimes when you're strong, you have to pretend to be weak to avoid focusing all your opponent's efforts on you at once. And Khan had just learned the hard way how insidious and contradictory war is. One minute he was winning. He was shutting up his weaker sister and brother. He was winning his father's favor, and he was defeating enemies outside the castle. And now he was flying like a limp doll to the ground. Demons had amazing biology. Even with his head cut off, Khan was still conscious and could even move his mouth. But he no longer had the lungs to squeeze out any sound. Selder and Termi watched their fallen brother with rapture. "This should have been done earlier," the sister said. It was high time to help his father, Termi thought. But he miscalculated about Selder's treachery, feeling the cold bite of steel under his rib. The sister laughed. It was obvious that this was how it was supposed to end, and the brother should have known about it from the very beginning. She stabbed him with her mother's dagger, which they revered as holy, and Termi was deeply shocked by this. But for her, nothing was sacred, because they were demons, and born for cunning, the one who adheres to the rules is ridiculous. "And any weapon exists to be used," said Seldera. "A princess could also inherit the demon kingdom," she added, pointing a blade at Termi. The thought that she would become the only successor made the crazy girl's cheeks flush. But Tamri wasn't going to give up just like that either. He was filled with hatred for his relative and rushed at her with all his anger. They were both filled with the most tender feelings of kinship towards each other. The blade and whip clashed with a ringing sound, signaling the start of another important battle in the demon camp. Kan lay on the ground, feeling a coldness on his cheek and a lightness below his neck. And he did not understand how, with such natural bloodthirstiness, demons were able to create a stable state and survive until these days. Suddenly the ground opened up beneath him and his body fell right into Rin's arms. She grabbed her master and put him back together piece by piece. Fortunately, there was only one cut, and it was surgically precise. Even the demon's brain could die from oxygen starvation, so no regeneration would help. Meanwhile, the demon army emerged from the castle and used the secret passage to reach the rear of the human camp. But on the other hand, they were already met by enemy troops, and there was not a single high-ranking commander or heir with the detachment to react to changes in plans. A fierce battle broke out. In close formation, people used magicians, demons, ferocity, and strength. The latter had no choice but to break through by force, even if all their plans were exposed by the enemy. Tolkien's wyvern burst into flames just like a real dragon. But Hal Calden was not afraid of this. The powerful enemy only provoked him. He quickly closed in on the monster and grabbed it by the neck, cutting off the flow of mana, after which, with his bare hands, he got himself a trophy for the wall in the dining room. General Tolkien was very upset. He was extremely attached to his pilot. Meanwhile, the men were firing barrages at the dense enemy formations, making it impossible to miss. The ranks of the demons thinned, but this did not stop their mad onslaught. At the same time, the magicians unleashed their power on the king, who was right under their noses. And although they thought that they had destroyed the invader, they soon discovered that this was not the case. As befits a true demon, Hal Caldan entered his second phase. His appearance transformed, and he lost his human features along with his clothes. Everything was exactly as in the books, General Tolkien said. Ceres also saw the Demon Lord's final form for the first time. Her soldiers were frozen in a primal fear of the monster, and the captain shouted at them to come to their senses and not dare to fear the enemy. But even Tolkien was overcome by a slight tremor that he could not stop, to say nothing of the ordinary soldiers. Kel's plan wasn't flawless and had its drawbacks. Like any trick, you inflict unexpected damage on the enemy, but pay for it with great risk. Even if the demon managed to quickly transfer troops to help the king, they could still end up surrounded and unable to escape. However, Hal Calden did not raise this issue, since it was not fitting for the demon king to think about trifles like an escape route. It was possible that Kella himself understood this too, the Lord thought. But now, having opened his third eye, Hela was worried about completely different things. Mana lashed out in a monstrous, dense stream around him, making him seem majestic and invulnerable. General Tolkien also felt that their enemy was now using its full potential. To defeat him, he would have to risk his life. The experienced warrior understood, and went into battle. In the center of the camp, they clashed with such force that the ground trembled under their feet. Meanwhile, in the deep dungeon of the castle, the maid Rin whispered prayers to all the gods she knew so that the severed nerves and blood vessels would heal properly, and that premature necrosis of brain tissue would not occur. Just recently, she and the young master had conducted a similar experiment, though it was extremely risky if it failed. Rin had helped the master reattach his severed arm to his body in the same way. After some time, it not only grew back, restoring its blood supply, but was also able to move, which indicated the unique structure of nerves capable of rapid regeneration and the rapid differentiation of such complex cells. The next step was to repeat Dr. Dowell's experiment, and Rin was horrified by the very idea of decapitating herself. At all costs, Khan was determined to prove the limits of his ability, as he intended to use this as a cunning plan. The experiment was extremely dangerous and even irreversible in case of failure, so Khan ordered the trembling Rin to act carefully. Fortunately, everything went well, and after that, Khan told Rin to go to Seldera's maid and convey his words as naturally as possible, although she could not be relied upon. But the prince simply did not have any other servants. So everything had to be left to Rin, who, in a trembling voice, told her colleague in the workshop about her master's plans. She revealed that Kella was going to kill her sister during the battle. While the Demon King was fighting the Heavenly Guild, the prince was planning to take advantage of his absence. Fortunately, despite their cunning, simple demons were terribly stupid, so Seldera's servant took everything at face value. Thus, Khan himself pushed his opponents to take action, and through Rin, conveyed his weakness by offering to cut off his own head. Everyone knew about the youngest prince's incredible regeneration, inherited from his father, so Rin's words were considered weighty. Everything worked according to plan. Now Kella was considered dead, but he still hadn't started breathing, so Rin cursed quietly. Even the most cunning and ingenious plan is meaningless if the prince ends up dying like a complete idiot. And then Khan opened his eyes and asked in a whisper not to call him that. Rin's ash-gray eyes widened in surprise. Because Kelder's blade was filled with mana, he actually almost died because his regeneration was slowed down. In any case, he survived, which means he already won, Khan declared and grinned devilishly. His plan had worked. Rin was so happy that she couldn't hold back her tears. Despite her attitude towards the young master, she was still attached to him and didn't want to serve anyone else. At that moment, she let her feelings out and hugged Khan tightly, sobbing loudly. The guy did not expect such sincere warmth and softness that he felt on his chest. Therefore, he quickly finished their reunion ritual, saying that since he had survived, there was not a second more to lose. First, he raised his hand and tore up their master and servant contract. With this, he gave her complete freedom, as he promised. Now she could go wherever she wanted. No more contract, Khan told her without any regrets. It would be difficult for a person from Earth to maintain such a relationship naturally anyway. He wished Rin a better life and smiled at the end. At that moment, his back seemed surprisingly wide to her. Ever since he was a child, Kella wanted her to be his friend, not his servant. The full depth of her affection washed over Rin. She simply couldn't let go of the one she'd spent her entire life with, and she begged her master to take her with him, even though there was no longer a contract between them. Rin clawed at her master and begged him to take her with him, but despite all his protests, she refused to leave. The battle between the humans and the Demon King was drawing to an end. General Talcon was breathing heavily. He understood what it meant to fight a real monster. Hal Calden lost his arm and received many wounds, but even so, despite the pain and weakness of his body, he still stood firmly and proudly on his feet. Such was the Demon King, stern and unyielding until the very end. As humiliating as it was to admit, the general understood that he could not defeat the demon on his own. He doubted that there was even one living creature capable of defeating such an enemy. The entire elite squad died a heroic death. They justified the money invested in them and did not flee the battlefield. But the demon army was also destroyed. They lost their entire army on this battlefield. Hal understood that his heirs would not come, which meant there was no one to expect help from. It was all his fight from the start anyway. He had no mana left and he put it all into one devastating explosion. Using a secret passage from the castle, Khan escaped to his freedom. He already saw the light at the end of the long old tunnel, and he rejoiced like a child. But suddenly, Rin blocked his path and told him to stop. She managed to put up a magical barrier that protected them, all because the maid managed to smell the blood and react. Then, right in front of them, magicians who were hiding in invisibility appeared. They were waiting here for those who would try to escape. There is nothing worse than leaving the noble offspring of the Demon King, who, having grown fangs, will again go to war against people. The path to freedom was again cut off for Khan. There were many enemies and the passage was narrow. He didn't expect this, because the passage was secret and no one was supposed to know about it. From the very beginning, people were watching their every move. Can realized that today, all the demons would die. The cries of spells were heard, and flashes of magic lit up the cave. Rin's shield withstood the second volley just as it had the first, though not without some effort. The girl was ready to give her life for him, so she told him to run back. Even without a binding contract, she considered it her duty to protect the prince. Rin was loyal, but unfortunately useless. Her knowledge was only enough for simple defensive magic, and combat magic was out of the question. But even so, Kana was deeply touched by her unconditional loyalty. Barely holding the shield, she turned to the prince and told him to run quickly. But he touched her shoulder and told her to step aside. Throwing the light girl back, Kan told her not to act like a strong woman in front of him. Since she was going to follow him, it was not worth dying right away. Kan was determined to sort things out completely. Rin was stunned by the power that began to beat around her in waves. The mages weren't too bothered by this change. There was nowhere to run in the narrow cave anyway. They knew that before them was the youngest prince of Kella, the weakest of the king's offspring, for whom even average magic was enough. Kella was always shy and never showed his true strength and abilities. Everything people knew about him was a complete lie. Kan easily reflected the spells to the side. Once again, he made Rin's eyes widen in surprise. Now the human mages realized that their enemy was not as simple as the reports said. But it was too late. Demons are faster and stronger than people, and with the power of a king, they are comparable to monsters. They should have checked their sources better, Kan said, pinning one man to the ground. He tried to break free, but the guy simply directed all his strength into his hand and squeezed it tightly. In an instant, he got rid of the commander of the human ambush squad. He didn't even have time to scream, and the other magicians wavered. Rin couldn't believe her eyes that the heavenly mage was so easily struck down. The other magicians were completely confused. They thought that they would be fighting a weak, lazy guy. Then Kan turned his gaze to them and again offered to check his informants. The poor fellows realized they had no other choice and used the Spear of Light spell. This magic required all of their mana to be put into one blow. If it doesn't work, they won't have any advantages anymore. Rin rushed to her master's defense again, realizing what the humans were up to. But before she could, they were both pierced by spears of light. But Kan received much more damage. Worse, these light beams made him unable to move. The magic was effective. Rin, with tears in her eyes, apologized for not being able to protect him. The mages were also squeezed dry, so that they could hardly breathe. They had already drawn their swords, but then one of the wizards decided that they could first receive a reward for their efforts before finishing the job. He took a fancy to the pretty maid, especially since such an opportunity only comes once in a lifetime. Rin spat angrily in his face. She knew how to treat captured demons. The sharp dagger at her face silenced the maid, and the magician chuckled contentedly. Kan, as a man of modern civilization, did not understand this medieval cruelty. But it was not for nothing that they said in ancient times, "Woe to the vanquished." One of the people began to approach the prince to finish everything. The exit was just around the corner, freedom awaited him there, and Kan couldn't believe that everything would end like this. The magician wished him good night and swung his sword. And then he was overcome by a strange feeling that came from the very depths of his being. Something was approaching, and Kan saw Hal Kaldan in front of him. At first he thought that somehow the king had returned after the battle, meaning his plan to escape was over. But his father simply told him that he had been through countless battles and had calculated all the options before each one. Kan asked him what he was talking about, since he did not understand at all what the king was getting at. Seldera is too cruel to her own kind to rule, Hal continued, completely ignoring Kan's question, and Termi is not ambitious enough to ascend the throne and lead the demons into the future. Kan cursed. He didn't care at all about his crazy and pathetic relatives. He didn't understand how Hal ended up here. Each demon king had the ability to pass on all of his mana to his heir, so they could continue their lineage and maintain their strength. Kan knew absolutely nothing about this important ritual and was stunned. He had been performing well lately, and this gave the Demon King hope that he had a worthy candidate for the role of successor. Kan tried to refuse. It was all a mistake. But King Hal Kaldan did not listen to him and announced that he was passing everything on to his descendant. A dense cloud of mana, like a black star, gathered in his hand. All the power that was contained in the king's body was transferred to Kanu. And although the guy denied everything and did not want to accept such responsibility, everything was decided for him. Hal Kaldan bequeathed his will to him, and hoped that his son would not disgrace his death with his tears, but he did not even suspect that he owed the changes in his heir to a completely different personality. Even after death, his face remained stern and terrible and eerie. His mortal enemy, General Talcon, lived only slightly longer than the Demon King and fell alongside him. He sacrificed himself to defeat the mortal enemy of all people like a true hero. Ceres was also seriously wounded and could not believe that it was all over. News of the Demon King's death quickly spread through the sparse ranks of the army, along with triumphal cries. No one even suspected that at that very moment the birth of a new demon lord took place. The mana that Khan received dispelled the light spells that were holding him and Rin back. The magicians were horrified by the unexpected splash, because now they were unarmed. Khan looked at his hand and laughed maliciously. He had just found out an important thing. Hal Calden, the Demon King and stern, merciless parent, had died as he had wanted, and his son had not mourned him, but had only laughed loudly. The magicians realized that while the air was in confusion, it was better for them to retreat than simply die. But Khan had no intention of letting the witnesses of his escape go. Hal gave him endless power that raged like a hurricane inside and rushed out. The guy remembered what those bastards called Rin, and what they wanted to do with them. This gave him the necessary toughness to deal with his enemies. Hal's full might fell upon them, and Khan quickly overpowered the mages. At the same time, he felt a strong recoil. The king's power was pressing on him, and the prince's body was not ready to withstand it. After making sure that Rin could go further, they moved towards the exit, leaving the enemies behind. Still, Khan was grateful to Hal, because he was able to escape from the castle with his help. Smoke from the fires in the demon castle was already rising on the horizon. All of this was in sharp contrast to the blooming valley that the fugitives had reached. The scent of meadow flowers, freshly mown hay, and fragrant herbs filled his lungs. The scent of freedom. Now Khan could go wherever he wanted and live the way he wanted in a world alien to him. However, then a beam of blue light fell on him, and the guy froze in place. The light of the teleportation spell, Rin shouted at him, realizing what it was. Khan ordered her to immediately grab his hand so that they would not be separated. She did so, and the last couple of demons disappeared from the valley in a bright flash. A huge city flashed beneath their feet, with a powerful fortress erected on the island. Where they ended up, Khan had absolutely no idea what kind of place it was and was confused. Rin thought that the young master had used a teleportation spell, but that was not the case. It looked more like an emergency spell that the king cast on his children in case of his death. The maid was amazed to find that all her wounds had healed. Khan estimated that they had been in the teleportation tunnel for about 3 days. This was done intentionally to allow them to recover and make it more difficult for enemies to find them. Magic of incredible level, teleportation, and healing at the same time. There was a genuine sense of concern for the children, Khan thought. It was a pity that he had to find out about it in this way. Rin also already realized that their king was dead, and the guy nodded. Everything happened exactly as they planned, so he was pleased with the result. The maid firmly declared that her master must now become the next king. But the guy had no plans for anything like that. He wanted to live like a human, not a demon. Rin insisted on her own. After Kella changed, she recognized him as the one worthy of becoming the true demon king. And with great fervor, the girl promised to serve him until he ascended the throne. Khan frowned. Rin clearly misunderstood something about him. He had no time for that right now, so he decided to just leave everything as it was. Suddenly, the maid was dumbfounded with surprise and told him to stop. They walked along a paved road towards a huge castle, whose high towers reached into the sky. They were in the mage kingdom of Arsol, Rin explained, familiar with the geography of their world better than the air. Every inhabitant of this country hates demons. They all live to exterminate their race. News of the king's fall had already spread throughout these lands, and posters with triumphal inscriptions were everywhere. What else could one expect from the best father in the world, who chose the camp of their mortal enemies as the evacuation point for his offspring? Rin immediately used transformation magic until they ran into local peasants and were lifted onto pitchforks due to their excessively long horns. Khan followed her example. Even Kella could use this magic in his memories. When they entered the city, he demanded that the maid tell him everything she knew about this place. Arsol was a small island state located on the eastern border of Talui. Its fortifications allowed them to maintain their independence, and its advantageous position on trade routes made the city very wealthy. A cryptid named Watergore, who lived in the sea surrounding the island, gave them his blessing and protection, and the inhabitants of the kingdom were able to develop magical abilities. This led to the emergence of very powerful magicians, and for a very long time now, Arsol has been at odds with the demons like other human states. All that remained now was to find out why the dead king had sent them to this dangerous place, and not somewhere in the wilderness. Rin suggested not to wander the streets of the capital, but rather to run away since the young lord himself understood the danger. But their escape required preparation. To set out on the journey, they needed money, information about roads and cities, and travel documents. Moreover, in order to realize his dreams in this world, Khan had to master magic. And how lucky that he ended up in a kingdom where literally everything is based on her. Magic was used in architecture. Some buildings could fly above the city thanks to clever spells. With such magic, he could create cities as if in a game. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by the treacherous call of a whale that came from Rin's belly. After 3 days of hanging out in the warp, they were both hungry and needed a snack. Fortunately, the city of merchants and magicians was full of various delicacies, and there were plenty of street food stalls. Having paid with pure silver, he couldn't give them demonic coins. Khan took them fish pies, which, according to Rin, were the best delicacy in the kingdom. But even after this snack, the girl was not full and demanded more. Khan didn't say anything, he just followed her example. It wasn't so bad to fill his stomach when he had time. In the end, she was the one who called for caution more than anyone else. Now she seemed to be having fun on the city streets, as if on an excursion. The guy was already thinking about rubbing the stupid maid somewhere on the narrow streets. But in the end, their fate led them to the same place where all travelers find refuge and solace. The tavern. A place where beer flows freely, where a lute always resounds at the behest of a drunken bard, and where the common folk instantly forget all the hardships of their harsh, ever-changing lives. Commander Ceres came here after the campaign, and with her red mane shining, she celebrated her victory over the Demon Lord, and everyone else walked with her. Since the valiant commander was pouring drinks at her own expense, a couple of escaped demons joined the festivities, not at all embarrassed by their occasion. Both quickly became intoxicated due to their age. Relaxing, Khan realized that resting here wasn't so bad. He felt warm and happy among people. It was very different from the cold and harsh castle of demons, where everyone wished him death. Ceres, who had exchanged her armor for light everyday clothes, sparkled with scorching beauty. Her chiseled figure, red ruby eyes, and fiery hair must have driven more than one man crazy. She noticed two strangers at once, their unusual speech and pronunciation. "A very interesting couple has appeared here," said the captain of the elite squad, and smiled. Having overindulged in drinks, Khan went out to freshen up. He might be used to walking around at home, but the prince's body had definitely never experienced such shocks before. Rin started grumbling about how the gentleman was going too far, even partying on the occasion of the death of the Demon King, who was his father. The boy grumbled in displeasure that it was she who suggested coming here. Then they heard the sound of dozens of feet, everyone shouting that someone of high rank was wanted. The couple of demons quieted down, stopped arguing, and decided to come closer to understand what was going on. Until now, only the Demon Lord had this wanted level. And then, when they came out to the square, they saw a huge poster with the face of the youngest heir of the demons. It was impossible not to recognize him, and Rin froze in bewilderment. The tavern's drinking must have taken its toll because Khan, contrary to his usual common sense, began to loudly and audibly complain. The Demon King had been sentenced, but he didn't understand why. Rin immediately shut him up and smiled sweetly at the townspeople, who looked at her with suspicion, but decided that another drunk was joking. All the mages in the kingdom of Arsal knew that Kella was the weakest of all the heirs, and was hardly worthy of such a great reward. However, Khan realized that he should have kept quiet for a while. He told Rin to follow him, and she almost compromised them again by calling him Lord. They should have agreed on how to address each other on the street much earlier. Khan told her his real name, and Rin looked at it suspiciously. It sounded so strange. However, both of them understood that they were in big trouble, since it became known so quickly that the heir of the Demon King was alive. On the other hand, since no one found his body, there was nothing surprising about it. Khan decided to simply finish all his business in the city and leave it as soon as possible, and the maid agreed. They again passed by the tavern where they sat and drank at Ceres's expense. The red-haired warrior had just come out to get some air. She had already realized from the shouts of the crowd that a high-ranking hunt had been declared. Khan nodded coldly, confirming this. They had just come from there. The guy looked warily at the warrior who was looking at him with interest. In the tavern, they called her the hope of the state, and she was clearly not an easy person. Ceres grumbled in displeasure that the pathetic demons had managed to escape. The guy smiled crookedly and said what everyone knew. Kella was a weak prince and he wouldn't stay alive for long. Rin echoed him, saying that they would deal with him soon. They both felt awkward talking about themselves in the third person. The warrior grabbed them both tightly by the shoulders and hung on with all her weight. She was far stronger than she appeared at first glance. It was unlikely that Hal's son could be defeated so easily, she said. Moreover, she noticed something back in the tavern, Cirrus said ominously. They both smelled strange, like strangers. And at these words the fugitives shrank, thinking that they had been discovered somehow. It seems like they are two travelers who haven't taken a bath for a long time. Cirrus suddenly finished her thought in a drunken voice. For a second, a couple of demons thought they had been found out for sure and were now facing death at the stake. But then Cirrus suggested that they continue the walk at her house and at the same time wash up. It was so strange that Khan and Rin couldn't immediately find what to say. Glad that they were not exposed as demons, they agreed to the offer. Ceres lived in luxury in those peaceful days when there were no wars, so much so that a wonderful hot spring bath was even built in her house, the water from which was supplied directly to the house. The guests were treated to delicacies and tea worthy of the finest royal houses. The cookie recipe also had a magical quality that altered his taste buds, and Khan found it amazing. He always dreamed of living in the game world, and one could say that the dream came true. He would hardly ever have seen such luxury at home on Earth. Being a time traveler in another world is great, decided the hero, who was incredibly lucky to be reborn as the heir of a king, albeit a demon. But he did not incarnate in the body of a slave or peasant, which were the majority, and he did not have to dig in the dirt for years just to survive. At the same time, Rin had to control herself so as not to inadvertently reveal her demonic nature. Since she and Cirrus were both girls taking a bath together, the warrior was not at all embarrassed by her guest, and she didn't understand why she was embarrassed and tense, like a demon caught in a snare. It was difficult to tell whether this was a clever remark or whether Cirrus was simply testing them. So the situation became even more awkward, and Rin smiled to hide her embarrassment. Ceres used sacred power, a scent that helped people relax and calm down. But for demons, it was the worst scent in the world because it absorbed their power. In this position, Rin's spell could wear off at any moment, and then she would reveal herself. Meanwhile, the warrior expressed her regrets. She thought that after the death of the demon king, peaceful times would come. The maid could barely hold on. She didn't care at all what the warrior said. She wanted to escape from the bath as quickly as possible. But the evening had just begun, and the charming Cirrus plunged into memories, deciding to talk about her past. True, Rin immediately cut off the flashback that never started, after which she asked to go to the restroom and ran out of the bathroom like an arrow. However, the perceptive Cirrus had already realized that the sacred aroma was not to the liking of the mysterious guest. In the corridor, Rin met a young gentleman who was just relaxing well, although now was not the time for a hot bath. The maid, horrified, said that she almost lost her transformation magic. This is because Cirrus used a sacred scent on her. Demons cannot resist it if it is used by a powerful magician. Can realized the threat posed by the warrior. Everything really could end badly. Despite this, he wanted to bathe in the springs once more, although Rin asked him to run away immediately. Their conversation reached the charming warrior, who reminded them that they should continue the fun. Rin tried to find a polite reason to run away. Then, the mistress of the house showed them the spell she had collected in her hand without reading it, and asked if they would like to try the food and drinks in this house, created with the help of magic. Her persistence could well be perceived as a threat. Can ignored it, but he became interested in magic. Whether it was culinary or not, he wanted to try everything. So, throwing aside all the warnings of his faithful servant, he agreed. And to the delighted cries of Cirrus, they headed to the dining hall. However, at this time, guards had already approached the house of the great warrior and surrounded it in dense ranks. They already knew that the demon was right in this house. These people were serious. They also knew about the identity of the demon, that it was none other than the heir himself. Everyone realized that now was an excellent opportunity to get rid of him. Meanwhile, the important guest drank tea made from holy water. It was hard to imagine a greater blasphemy. On the other hand, Kanu was interested in whether the water remained holy after it passed through the body. He had already managed to regret his decision, because the holy power burned him with fire from the inside, no worse than his brother's treats, thanks to natural regeneration he held on. But Rin was worse off. Ceres, as if not noticing this, decided to talk about her past again, although no one asked her. In order to kill the Demon King, she joined Talkin's squad long before this event, and trained at the risk of her life and limb. The wide, palm-thick scar that disfigured the warrior's beautiful silky skin was her reward for passing the exam. Rin was surprised by this mark, because she had not noticed it when they were taking a bath. But that was far from all. Cirrus ran her hand over her face, and the guests saw another monstrous scar on her beautiful face. This wound deprived her of the right ruby. With the help of simple magic, It was possible to hide these injuries from everyone and remain beautiful, because their appearance brought back unpleasant memories for Cirrus, the brutal training in the squad, where they were forced to ignore pain and hardship, and all they had to think about was the death of the Demon King. Their unit was created with one single purpose and accepted into its ranks only soldiers who were impeccably obsessed with this goal. Losing an eye was nothing compared to what they were forced to endure during their training. The commander ordered Cirrus to stand up and state their objective out loud, his voice still ringing in her ears. This is how she spent her entire adult life. One of the best warriors in the kingdom, she earned injuries, endured all the pain. Cirrus leaned sharply against Kanu, placing her hand on his face and asking what he'd been doing all this time. Such closeness would have made any young man's heart skip a beat, but even despite her scars, the warrior was incredibly beautiful. Her cool hands, slightly rough from wielding a sword, slid under the boy's light shirt and lifted it. There wasn't a single scar on Khan's soft, satiny skin. Kel, whose body he'd taken over, was a demon. His wounds always healed without a single scar, and his skin always remained taut and fresh. Because of this, the guy looked not like a warrior, but like a gentle, noble offspring. Rin already understood which way the wind was blowing and became nervous. There was reason to panic, because even Cirrus's light touches to the body dispelled the simple transformation magic. He turns out to be a demon, the warrior concluded in a chilling voice. However, at that very moment, a swarm of white mice invaded the room, bursting in through the chimney. And a moment later, they turned into people. Now it was a real invasion. A couple of demons stared at the magicians in amazement, realizing that they had fallen into a trap. Cirrus had lured them into this trap and distracted them with her strange speeches, they realized. The warrior smiled welcomingly. Now everyone was gathered, she said. Nevertheless, the mages were hostile, specifically toward the mistress of the house. They saw a scar on her face, exactly like the one described in the heavenly message. All this time she was hiding among them, the magician said menacingly, and Cirrus announced to the demons that he had invaded Arsal. Now the guests from another kingdom were even more stunned. Realizing that the people had not come for him, Khan was completely at a loss as to what to do. The warrior extended her hand and her magic wand appeared in it. There was no longer any point in hiding her identity, but it was she who informed the heavens that she was a demon, Cirrus declared. The confession was enough to seize her, and the mages attacked with their wands. In response to this, Cirrus only smirked. She was still an elite battle mage, and such weaklings were no match for her. Rin screamed that it was time to leave, but Khan froze in place. Feeling the pressure of mana, the guy realized that things were bad for them. And then a monstrous explosion thundered in the confined space of the house. Despite this, they survived under the protection of Cirrus's powerful mana. It seemed that the mages did not care at all that someone might die, along with the warrior. What surprised the couple of demons most was that Cirrus covered for them. They were demons too, there was no point in hiding it, she said. Especially since she is the daughter of the Demon King. Cirrus Kaldun declared the red-haired beast and smiled. Time was short, so she decided to simply show her memories using memory transfer magic, and thus began the second flashback in such a short time. Immersed in a stream of memories, Khan saw the Demon King again. They looked at the little girl who had a unique skill to hide her horns and demonic power. His blood flowed through her veins, and the king acknowledged Cirrus as his daughter. The girl did not understand at all how this was possible and was stunned. From birth, she was a common subject for experiments along with other children. Every day was hell for them, as demons experimented on them. All Cirrus could do then was grit her teeth and endure the pain. In the end, she was the only survivor after all the experiments. She had no hope left at all and decided that she would be next. But now, she was suddenly recognized as the daughter of the Demon King. Not believing her luck, Cirrus smiled and said that it was a great honor for her. That day, the king named her Cirrus and gave her his surname. Her mission was to infiltrate the ranks of heaven and deliver valuable information to her homeland. It's astonishing that a child who had never known love would agree to live as a stranger in a strange land, hoping to gain at least a sliver of it. She was ready to do anything for her new father, and soon a child was found on the borders of the kingdom of magicians. The little girl, bearing marks of torture and wounds inflicted by demons, had real marks to make her legend more convincing. She was immediately carried to the infirmary. Ironically, she received more care from her enemies than from those she served. But Cirrus remained loyal to her people, despite all the hardships. She endured all the difficulties on her way to the highest positions in order to better play her role as a spy, and eventually became one of the strongest commanders in the elite human squad. After 15 years of service, she met her father again, but on the battlefield, as an enemy. continuing to play her role. She wanted to run up to her father and hug him, but she restrained this impulse. Using hidden magic, Cirrus weakened the soldiers of her squad and waited for the right moment to betray. First, it was necessary to eliminate all the warriors, and then General Tolkien himself. Only after this could Cirrus return to her homeland and be reunited with her father, something she had dreamed of all these years. After all, she was still his daughter, Cirrus Kaldin, and she bore that name with pride. However, the balance of power was somewhat different, and the battle ended completely differently than the spy expected. Even the wounded king maintained a proud posture in front of the pathetic little people. The general prepared another spell, which was supposed to be the last, the Heavenly Spear of Martes, a magic into which the general poured all his strength without a trace. The Demon King responded in kind and unleashed Magnalexer's hellfire. Ceres watched this suicidal fight in horror and did not know what to do. And then both opponents disappeared in a dense cloud of magical power. At that very moment, she heard his voice inside her. Her father conveyed his final order to her through his thoughts. He asked her to serve the next Demon King just as she served him. That's how Ceres, who lived all these years with only hope, was left alone again. Her whole life was a fake. The expectation of more was the only thing that gave her strength, but at that moment she felt only emptiness. Without revealing herself, she returned to the remaining forces of people and then to her home, where she celebrated the death of her master loudest of all, together with all the citizens who rejoiced. They had been waiting for this event for a whole 1,000 years and were glad that the war was over. Unable to pretend any longer, Cirrus left her high military post and returned to Arsal. This place has long become her second home, although she convinced herself that the Kingdom of Demons was her homeland. But Cirrus spent much more time here. She decided that she would start from scratch and went to drown her sorrows in a tavern, giving vent to the joy behind which the tears were hidden. Here she planned to destroy all people and avenge her father, starting with Arsal. Having watched this entire flashback in 1 second, Rin could not believe her eyes that in front of them was the daughter of the Lord himself, albeit a named one. Can was horrified because he had barely managed to get rid of his older relatives when another one appeared on the horizon, from whom it was unknown what to expect. Even though they were related only on his father's side, he didn't expect to meet another sister here. However, Sirius had no intention of forcing them to join her by force. They were in the most dangerous place for demons, the magical kingdom of Arsal, and the longer Kella Keldon allowed him to exist, the higher the likelihood that he would eventually die, the warrior stated. There was a grain of truth in that because even in games, mages were always the key fighting force, Khan thought. And if he doesn't deal with them, he himself will find himself in great danger. The mages recovered from the initial shock. Their captain knew that the noise of explosions and the crackling of spells would bring the guards running, and then they would deprive their squad of a valuable trophy, and all the glory would go to someone else. So the magicians decided not to hold back and use maximum power. Then Khan cast aside his doubts. Even if he maintained his pretense, no one would take their lives into account. He dropped his disguise, revealing his true nature to everyone, but in the end it was all nothing more than self-defense. Ceres, hearing his words and feeling the familiar energy, turned around in surprise. She immediately realized that the boy had inherited his father's strength. All night after that, the last 3 demons fought with people like animals. In Rin's eyes, it looked like a real massacre as the 2 descendants of the Demon King began to fight with all their might. For Ceres, Arsal was a second home, so she knew every corner of the city, its defensive structures, and so on. With her power, the spy destroyed all the government buildings where the rulers had taken refuge, including the Academy of Magic. Together they simply carried out revenge, since no one expected an attack. The army was scattered throughout the city, and most of it had not yet recovered from the celebration. There was no one to protect the most important and key figures of the kingdom. Using the power inherited from the Demon Lord, Khan showed these people how careless they were. Surprisingly, he quickly immersed himself in the medieval custom of being merciless to the enemy. And so, in one night, the island kingdom, which for centuries had been an impregnable fortress and center of trade, was destroyed to the ground. The entire city disappeared in hellish flames. When the fire started, no one could fight anymore, and a wall of fire and smoke covered the entire city. The few survivors were horrified by this nightmare. It was like a sudden volcanic eruption. But in the end, no one survived the night, and their voices were drowned out by the crackling of the fire. The demons dealt with people without any mercy to take revenge for the destruction of their own homeland. The sight was terrible. Ceres laughed like a madwoman, clearly enjoying what was happening, and proclaimed that she wanted to exterminate the entire human race. Such plans were already a bit excessive and went against the life that Khan imagined for himself. They had already helped each other enough, so the guy hoped to go their separate ways at this point. But Cirrus didn't let him go. She had already recognized Kelkaldan's mana. There was no point in hiding, so Khan didn't deny it. And in the end, he confirmed her guess, taking a deep breath. His relationship with the Demon Lord had caused him a lot of trouble. Ceres suddenly screamed, realizing that she had guessed correctly. Apparently, she hadn't been sure until the very end. However, the warrior did not claim his place as heir. She was created with the blood of Hal Calden, and Cirrus was more of a mutant. Realizing her place, she recognized Cal's right to inherit the throne. Moreover, since she was created after the prince's birth, she was formally his younger sister, and the guy turned pale from the warrior's antics. They both wanted to avenge their father, so Cirrus suggested joining forces. But the guy from Earth had completely different plans. He didn't escape from the castle to take revenge on anyone later. At the same time, Cirrus was fanatically devoted to Hal, and now she needed a new master, a new meaning in life. The only ruby sparkled with malice, and one look told you that if the guy didn't agree, he and Rin would die on the spot. So Kan immediately decided to play along with her a little, and agreed. Then the spy ordered to follow her and continue the mass destruction. This could not please Khan, because he hoped to learn a lot in these lands. But now, Cirrus was the only source of our soul's magic, and there was no other choice but to follow her. Under the guise of revenge, Khan could stall for time and decided to treat Cirrus as one of them. Among the ruins of the city, there was one miraculously surviving magician who decided at all costs to tell the heavens about what had happened. Soon, this very urgent and important report reached the desk of King Talua. Kroll ate without interrupting the meetings and listened to the report. The news of Cirrus's betrayal was very disturbing, as she was considered one of the best in the elite squad. The king stopped chewing and looked questioningly at the secretary, waiting for him to explain everything. And then the servant reported the second disturbing news. Our soul was destroyed after Kella himself, the son of the Demon Lord, appeared in it. Then, the fat king struck the table with his thick-fingered ringed fist. It was obvious that the dangerous demons were now acting in concert. The king was furious at the totality of the problems they had just encountered. Before people had time to recover from one war, another had begun. If this news reaches the wrong place, the king and his retinue will be ridiculed and the defeat will be attributed to him. Therefore, he immediately ordered the destruction of the demons, before widespread rumors spread throughout all the lands, and even threatened to remove them from their positions in case of failure. Then the servant in the monastic cassock swore on his name that he would carry out this order. He left the king's chambers and went out to the eerie exhibition that stood in the middle of the hall. Even the dead demon lord was causing them a lot of trouble, and Hayden vowed to himself to destroy everyone who had demon blood in them. After this, Hayden sent a message to General Killian, demanding that he come to the palace, but there was still no news from him. He was the best knight among men, surpassing even the previous General Talcon. The general was Killian's brother, who had just received news of his death. He died a hero's death fighting demons, said the young man, whose body was completely covered with scars. The servant relayed Hayden's orders with trepidation. They needed a great knight to defeat Calden. Killian cut him off rudely, not caring at all what King Talua wanted, since the demons had dared to kill his brother. Now he simply must destroy every demonic spawn on the continent. His gray, almost colorless eyes blazed with cold fury, and not a muscle moved on Killian's chiseled face. Meanwhile, the merry trio were snacking on wild boar meat roasted on a spit in the forest. Khan wasn't used to eating so much, but for Cirrus, it was a light snack. Rin was amazed at how the warrior remained so slim despite having a dragon's appetite. But it was all due to her active lifestyle. The maid immediately took note of this advice, as if it were some kind of important wisdom. Khan himself was glad that at least this sister was not trying to kill him, unlike his other relatives. But he still could not say whether Cirrus envied him or not for the fact that he became the heir of Hal Caldan. That's why I decided to ask about it directly, hoping to clarify everything right away. Cirrus immediately declared that she would very much like to wring his neck. But because the blood of one she loved and respected flowed in him, she calmed her demonic anger. Moreover, now he is not just a surviving demon. He is the future lord of demons, all that is left of their kingdom, and she is obliged to protect him. This was another striking difference between the new sister and those blonde offspring of Hal. Cirrus gently placed her hand on his hands, and with the warmth in her eyes, she promised to sincerely protect him with all her might. Kan was only technically related to her, so he blushed momentarily at the revelation. The faithful maid caught this change in mood and immediately became wary. She tried to immediately distract the young gentleman from his indecent thoughts and began to feed him, although he was not hungry. Rin also vowed to protect him until her death. It looked like she was going to compete for his attention. Ceres changed the subject, and like an experienced warrior, she advised them to find another place to spend the night, in case the best human hunters were already approaching them. However, Khan objected and confidently said that this place was ideal. It took very little effort to create an impenetrable secret fortress here. To build the shelter, they used scrap materials and a fireplace. After that, Khan used the rest to absorb everything he had learned on this expedition. Even with the demon lord's mana, he needed time to recuperate. Ceres, who spent much more mana and had a lower recovery speed, was completely exhausted. So they worked during the day and rested at night, strengthening their secret camp. Meanwhile, the second detachment of the elite human guard, led by the knight Killian, arrived in the capital. They lined up at the gates of the royal palace and began to wait for his majesty. The old corpulent man broke into a satisfied grin. These knights inspired fear with their very appearance. Killian arrived dressed in white, as noble as a prince. His subordinates looked defiantly at the commander, who had become stronger during his absence. His brother would be happy if he were here, said the knight behind Killian. His name was Did, and another squad member immediately shut him up. She had blonde hair and long ears, so the elite squad wasn't made up entirely of humans. Audrey glared at him and Deed let out a disappointed chuckle, her interruption again. Another of Killian's knights, taller than him, doubted that they should have answered the king's call at all. Even the immediate death of Kel Calden could hardly satisfy their hatred. This giant's name was Kalka. Killian apologized and asked to be left with St. Curdley so they could talk. Despite Killian's serene face, he was filled with hatred just by looking at the head of Lord Hal, who had killed his brother. "Disgusting!" Did blurted out, and Audrey immediately shushed him to keep his mouth shut. Killian asked the saint if the tracking magic would work if Hal's head was used. There was some chance that magic could track down those in whose veins the blood of the former ruler flowed, so Curdley immediately began preparations. And then Killian grinned ominously, looking at the head of the dead man, who even after death did not close his eyes. Meanwhile, Cirrus woke them up early in the morning. She, like no one else, knew that Tolkien's second detachment would soon be sent for them. The kingdom of Talua did not have high hopes for the success of the first elite squad, and immediately began preparing a second one. The first attempt was an experiment designed to test new warfare tactics. The majority of Talua's forces and resources ultimately went to the second detachment of the guard. Can had heard something about the White Tolkien, and he frowned. This was a serious threat. Killian's squad consisted entirely of true geniuses who had undergone the best training. This means that the former commander Cirrus, and the killer of the Demon King, was weaker than his brother. Although Cirrus didn't want to admit it, these geniuses were stronger than the first squad. It's hard to even imagine how much stronger. Rin was immediately horrified, because their plan to invade the human world with the forces of 3 demons now looked not just crazy, but completely hopeless. All of Killian's squad members had been training in isolation, and it would take time to summon them all together, so Talua needed to be destroyed as soon as possible, Cirrus informed them. Talua was much larger than Arsel, and simple luck would not have helped to win the fight here. Khan was sure that since they had put a search warrant on him, Killian's squad had probably already been assembled. Without help, they would never be able to destroy a large kingdom, so first they needed to build a base and gather an army. An army comparable in strength to the geniuses of White Tolkien was needed, and a base that will not fall in the event of an invasion by Talua's forces. In other words, they must create an ideal dungeon, Khan proclaimed passionately. Unlike the Demon Lord, Khan did not want to act rashly, lest he suffer the same fate. Therefore, he intended to build the strongest dungeon of all time, and then declare war on Talua. This thought pleased the sister and the maid, words worthy of a Demon Lord. How glad he was that it worked, because the idea had just occurred to him, and he was just making it up as he went along. Ceres already knew the demons that could be recruited and happily agreed to proceed with the plan. Both girls welcomed the start of preparations for war as if they were talking about a wedding. They began to actively discuss plans for the future, eagerly offering ideas, and so Khan realized that his thought had reached them. All this still served the purpose of gaining time for oneself and one's freedom. More than anything, Khan wanted to create his own world, where no one would interfere with him. He dreamed of realizing a map that he could not create on Earth, a utopian world. Then the guy moved on to the question of recruiting promising demons. First, they needed a reliable guide who knew the area well. Ceres wondered if there was such a demon on her list, and soon remembered one. But they had to go to him, so they set off straight away. In order not to waste time on the road, Khan began to study the magic of Arsol from the books of Ceres. It's hard to teach much in a short period of time, but he tried. Thanks to the blood of the Demon King, magic came to Kanu surprisingly easily and simply. All this made him happy, from the thought that he himself was learning and creating magic with his own hands, thus getting closer to his goal. 4 days later, they reached a deserted area where it seemed impossible to live. According to Ceres, this place was not like this but was transformed when Tolkien set up an ambush. Before she could say anything else, their tiny squad was ambushed. With loud cries of death to Tolkien, some evil demon pierced Ceres' shoulder with a spear. But the red-haired witch didn't even flinch, understanding how those who didn't know about her true role should treat her. Rin was horrified that their main protector allowed herself to be injured. But Khan waved his hand at her to remain silent and not to interfere. He was confident that Ceres knew what he was doing and how to convince the local tribes. The demons were outraged by her passivity, deciding that the witch simply did not see them as worthy opponents. Then Ceres knelt down and said that she would take their anger until they felt better. The position of her hands indicated that she was familiar with the customs of this tribe. The witch asked them for forgiveness and made it clear that she was the same demon as they were. This left the tribe confused, as in the past the witch had arrived here with Tolkien's detachment. Khan joined their conversation and introduced himself as the last descendant of the Demon Lord. Showing them his aura, he declared that his companion was not lying. The dense aura of hellfire confirmed his belonging to the royal family better than any regalia and titles. Recognizing him as their master, the tribe immediately fell to their knees before Khan. Thus he gained power over the earth demons as soon as he appeared on their lands. In the eyes of the faithful servant, her master had just ascended to another level of veneration. The red-haired witch also chuckled contentedly, rejoicing at how easily they had conquered this tribe. Khan had already mentally imagined the impregnable underground fortress that he would build with their help. Since demons were culturally trained to respect hierarchy and obey the strongest, which Kella undoubtedly was thanks to his father's mana, all the locals recognized him as their master. The old demon aristocrats were happy to serve the new ruler and groveled before him with favorable offers. Khan himself examined the local architecture. It was sharply different from what he saw in the king's castle and in Arsol with its soaring buildings. The local tribes managed to create a strong city from improvised means and without the help of magic, which was already incredible. They created it underground, hidden from view, and thus managed to avoid complete destruction. The new army would definitely need the ingenuity of the earth demons to create the dungeon, Khan agreed. But besides them, they needed the help of another outstanding warrior, said the red-haired witch. Khan immediately pricked up his horns and asked who it was. Underground, he didn't need to maintain camouflage. Tolkien discovered this city on his way to the Demon King's castle, Ceres said. They attacked the earth demons suddenly and destroyed them without mercy. The last ones, in terror, had to run in all directions just to survive. By order of Tolkien, the forest surrounding the demon settlement was burned to the ground so that they would never be able to recover. They were on the verge of destruction when one warrior appeared who dared to protect the children. Standing before them, he was ready to sacrifice himself rather than let his children be torn to pieces by ignorant barbarians. Then Ceres, being a spy, mocked this man. Tolkien was touched by such selflessness, which could be found even among people. The warrior's name was Douglas, and he was a common earth demon. Tolkien looked at him carefully, as if he wanted to penetrate into his very soul. If Douglas had been born a human, he might even have served in his unit, the general thought then. Therefore, he ordered to stop the attack and continue on to the Demon King's castle. Douglas, who expected the worst, could not believe his long ears. His bravery saved the rest of the tribe, Ceres told him before leaving. For a long time this demon stood stunned and did not dare to move. He did not chicken out and protected the children until the very end, the witch told Kanu. Even his name sounded dignified. Rin admired the demon's courage. An earth demon who understands battles was a great fortune for the future ruler. Then, in the middle of a feast in his honor, Khan announced that he wanted to meet Douglas. But the nobility immediately began to object, saying that this warrior was known for his stubbornness, and it would be better to call on someone more accommodating, said the old man next to Khan. But the guy did not change his mind and demanded to be told the warrior's location. When he came to his house, he was faced with a firm refusal to obey. Douglas was very different from all the aristocratic sycophants. He worked with a hammer, Without even turning to Kel and not seeking his mercy, even though he was a king, this did not oblige the demons to obey. Can asked what would happen if he used force but without a threat in his voice. Douglas looked gloomily at the air and replied that it was better to fight and die. He was born and raised here, so he did not want to leave his homeland until his death. This warrior considered it his duty to defend his homeland, so he remained as firm as the anvil on which his hammer resounded. Can agreed with the description of this guy. He really was stubborn. Douglas politely apologized and returned to work. In games, you often had to roll the dice several times to get the character you wanted. But Khan had no intention of taking Douglas by force. It was hardly possible to earn loyalty that way, so he went out into the city again to take a better look at its surroundings. This convinced the guy even more that he really needed a subject with the knowledge of an earth demon. The girls, meanwhile, indulged in alcoholic drinks and did not think about business at all. Can understood what it was like to be a ruler and think about everything alone, while his subjects were simply idle. So I simply decided to lead something that couldn't be fought and appreciated the drinks at the local tavern. Apparently, the earth demons lived well and did not have a food crisis, since they could afford to produce alcoholic beverages. When the noble guests grew tired, the unctuous elder ordered them to be taken to the best chambers. For the first time in a long time, Khan slept in a comfortable bed with clean sheets. But now the heavy axe of another demon was hanging over the peacefully sleeping heir. There was a crash of breaking furniture as the axe swung down. The heir, who was sleeping peacefully, was only pretending to be so, but in reality he was already expecting an attack. Dodging the first blow, Can jumped sharply off the broken bed. The demons growled curses at him. Everyone knew that Kella was a coward, and therefore did not believe that he could fight back. Can quickly assessed the situation, the number of enemies and their strength. Even in the forge, he noticed that Douglas was forging not weapons at all, but shackles. Besides, they would hardly be suitable for any orc, too small to use on a grown man. While Khan was walking around the city, he noticed that he was being followed. And this only strengthened his suspicions about the local authorities, which made him look at everyone more carefully. Behind one of the walls, he discovered a barely visible magical barrier, so weak and subtle that if he didn't have the Demon King's mana, he wouldn't have even noticed. There was something else strange that came out of Sirius's story. Douglas was protecting the children of the Dark Elves. The question begged itself. After all, in the city, the guy didn't notice a single child among the many adults. Then everything made sense. In one instant, the heir wounded all the attackers with the power of the ruler. Douglas didn't tell the human general that he would protect the children. He only said that he wouldn't give them up. He didn't care at all about protecting them. He was simply afraid of losing important prisoners. Realizing that he had been exposed, the demon winced in fear. Following this, Khan suggested that he remove all the covers and remove the magical barrier. Taking Douglas hostage, he led him outside where other earth demons were waiting for them, armed with axes. No doubt they all knew the truth that Douglas was hiding. Otherwise, they would not have gathered here. The elder, who had been groveling before the heir all day, now cursed Douglas for letting everyone down. Khan warned the demons that if anyone moved, he would deprive their warrior of his head. The old aristocrats began to grumble and curse the heir again. So they approached the barrier, and by the will of the ruler, Khan ordered the seal to be removed. Douglas inserted a stone into the wall and then it opened, and behind it appeared a dungeon with dozens of prisoners from another tribe. Everything was much more terrible than even Khan imagined. At that moment, the girls finally showed up in response to the noise. They too had been ambushed, and they were worried about the heir. But when they looked inside the dungeon, their eyes widened at the terrible picture that appeared before them. Can asked the red-haired witch to read the memories of one of the elves and show them to him. They might not be as clear as her own, but it was certainly possible, Sirius said. Khan agreed, and the witch read the memory spells. So he concentrated, and the memories of one elf poured into his mind. This place was a real hell for them. Khan immediately felt the streams of pain and suffering that accompanied each image. The elf's mother was forced to become pregnant, and that is how she was born. Each life was born in this way against their will, the human nobility choosing their servants from among the young elves. And she took these children away from their mothers, without any pity. For this, the demons received huge amounts of money and amassed a fortune by trading slaves. From the adult elves who were captured later, the children who grew up in the dungeon learned about the outside world, because they had never seen it. They knew about the endless sky and oceans only from stories, as well as about the existence of delicious food, fragrant herbs, and the singing of birds. But these stories gave them hope. Thanks to them, children grew up with at least some understanding of the outside world. The elves had been in the darkness for so long that they dreamed of only one thing, for their children to see the light of the sun. When Khan realized the true horror of what was happening, he cursed the Earth Demon tribe and abandoned his plans to use them. At that very moment, blazing with rage and righteous anger, he hit Douglas, causing him to fly into the wall. Ceres was also horrified by how she was treated. Douglas was not a great warrior who saved the children. He just wanted to sell them into slavery. Dark elves are a rare commodity, and highly prized among the high nobility, the demon replied with a broken mouth. Moreover, nature itself loves them. And thanks to this, the earth demons lived in peace. So it made sense to breed them like cattle, Douglas said. And it's not like he said anything particularly cruel, because humanity on Earth has been engaged in the slave trade for centuries, selling everyone regardless of gender, ethnicity, or religious beliefs. Ceres and Rin were outraged that the demons were selling those who were practically their relatives. Douglas tried to justify his tribe's actions by saying that without the demon lord, it was their only way to survive. It's one thing to read history books, but quite another to immerse himself in it and see it all with his own eyes. Khan realized he was wrong to think he was unhappy, because his father often beat him. In life, everything is learned through comparison. The life of slaves was incomparably more difficult compared to the life of a 21st century person on Earth. Unfortunately, even now in the civilized world there is slavery. Khan could no longer stand aside when he saw this. He was filled with anger and pain. He wanted to change this world. Therefore, he turned sharply to his companions, surrounding himself with an aura of fire. "It's time to finish General Tolkien's unfinished business," he said in an icy voice. Both girls agreed that betraying their own deserved death. Thus, the heir of the demon lord condemned an entire tribe to ruin because they violated the law of friendship and love between related tribes. Douglas also shouted to attack. There were only 3 defenders against all the warriors. The demons immediately rushed first at the red-haired witch, knowing what she was capable of. Rin also got it, and had to quickly fight off many enemies at once. The situation was difficult. Ceres used magic, cursing the traitors who dared to attack the heir. The demons did not give in. They believed that they could handle it, especially since they still considered the heir a weakling. The maid furiously began to scatter the demons when she heard them slandering the future ruler. Douglas reached out to Khan, but Khan managed to grab his hand right in front of his face. All this was not a game, not a virtual reality. This was real, harsh medieval life, thought Khan. And he no longer intended to sit idly by as before. With a sharp kick, he again corrected Douglas's face. For some time, the slaves did not believe what was happening. And suddenly they realized that you were doing all this for them, which meant they had to help. One of the slaves, named Wood, took a step forward, but the others tried to stop him because the fight could be dangerous for them, especially since the outcome was not clear. But Wood saw this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and was willing to take the risk. All the memories associated with his time as a slave came flooding back to him. The dark elf fell to his knees, choking with pain and hatred for his captors. Khan, who was standing nearby, noticed this change and looked at the prisoner with alarm. After this, he told Douglas to listen to these screams because soon he would scream exactly the same way. The demon refused to give up so easily and resorted to a last resort, ordering the others to swallow the earth ore as well. The rest followed his order, because if they lost, they themselves could become slaves, and quickly swallowed some kind of potion. Rin had heard old stories about this potion, but thought they were legends. By ingesting this substance, the demon sacrifices part of his life to increase his physical abilities tenfold. Right before their eyes, Douglas gained unprecedented physical strength, his muscles bulging and tearing his clothes to shreds. As if that weren't enough, demonic energy grew within them, and the scales tipped in favor of the enemy once again. Khan still couldn't use Hal's abilities to their full potential. Douglas rushed towards him like a hungry beast, his movements no longer skillful, only blind fury. And then the young ruler realized how badly he had miscalculated in this matter. But there was no blow. Flexible, thick roots burst out of the ground and grabbed Douglas, tightly wrapping their arms around his body. "No one will publish on him again, never," said the elven slave. His name meant forest, and the other elves were at first afraid that their fellow tribesmen would decide to intervene in the battle and bring even more suffering upon them. Douglas growled furiously, promising the slave eternal torment for this betrayal. But he quickly fell silent. Khan cut short his life so that the suffering of others would not be repeated. This was a favorite move of the demon lord, which Khan had once experienced himself. After which he praised Wood for his excellent work. He already liked this elf. Even while dying, Douglas did not understand anything and cursed Wood for betraying him, considering himself a benefactor because he raised him. Enraged, Douglas no longer tried to conserve his strength to survive. He broke the tree bonds that held him back. His body had grown in size again, Khan realized with alarm, after which he received a powerful blow straight to the chest and flew off to level the walls. The wall is not a feather bed, so the landing was rather hard. The guy was amazed at how powerful the Earth's force was. The demon rushed towards the slave who dared to rebel and wanted to take revenge on him. Douglas grabbed the skinny slave with one hand and lifted him up. The demon's eyes glazed over and became bloodshot, just like a bull's. Hatred blinded Douglas's mind as he completely forgot about his main opponent and switched to Wood. Can flew too far to reach the slave's rescue in time. He urgently needed a long-range attack. Suddenly, he was transported to another place, as if time had slowed down. "This is his subconscious," said the shadow, and called the guy a fool. The guy turned around and asked who it was. "Time has slowed down, but we still need to act quickly," the shadow said, ignoring the question itself. Khan still wanted to save the elf who first decided to help him. That's why he demanded to be told how he could be saved. "He's still not ready to use the full power Hal Calden gave him," the shadow said. "But as the mind and body become more deeply resonant, new abilities will become available to him." Can impatiently threw aside all explanations and demanded to simply be told what to do. "There was one way," the shadow said, and a glowing object appeared in his hand. The thing was made entirely of mana, and the shadow passed it on to Kanu, calling him by name. The guy was amazed to realize that his unknown ally knew about his true nature. When Khan returned to reality, he saw Hal's fire arrow in his hand, and immediately used the awakened skill to save Wood. Douglas saw a bright light and turned in shock towards the air, because he thought he had already taken him out of the battle. Taking advantage of this moment, Wood summoned his tree roots again. "His shamelessness is at an end," the future Demon King shouted to Douglas, and from the magic bow an arrow of pure power flew. As soon as she touched Douglas, he burst into flames like a Christmas tree, and the thick roots protected Wood from the fire. Douglas begged for help, but there was nowhere to wait for it, and soon he became silent. Can looked at his bow. On the one hand, he was glad that everything worked out. On the other hand, he was worried that someone knew his real name. Meanwhile, Rin was left completely alone, fighting off an entire crowd at once. The low ceiling prevented Sirius from using powerful explosion spells because it could collapse and kill everyone. Then Khan shouted at her not to worry about it and said that he would deal with it himself. He fired arrow after arrow, honing his newly acquired skill on the demons, and they all burned perfectly, as if they had been doused with gasoline. The red-haired witch chuckled contentedly, seeing that the young heir's mana had become stronger again. Now, in addition to close-range attacks, he also had a powerful long-range attack in his arsenal. Soon the battle was over and all the slavers were reduced to ashes. Because of their drugs, the Earth Demons turned out to be much stronger than Sirius thought. No one could have imagined that they would risk sacrificing their lives. Can tucked a couple of the pills into his pocket to study them in the future. Turning to the elves like a true ruler of the peoples, the boy proclaimed their freedom. He granted them complete freedom and independence, in the hope that they would never again allow themselves to be captured by anyone. The unfortunate people did not believe that their age-old dream had come true. Can nodded affirmatively, making it clear that this was not a joke. They could all go wherever they wanted. They could also take their children and leave this place, which caused them so much pain. Then the whole tribe fell on their knees before the Liberator and began to thank him. But now their plan to take the Earth Demons into the team had completely failed, and they had to think about what to do about it. Rin also sighed heavily. Even though they hadn't made any allies, the world had become a little cleaner. Meanwhile, Khan decided to ask Wood where he was from and what he knew about the outside world. Wood had no family to return to. And then the future Demon Lord called him to join their crusade. They still needed someone who knew the area well. Wood felt insecure. He didn't have a good understanding of geography and thought he would be useless. But Khan told the elf not to worry about it because he was given the love of nature, and besides, he had already proven in battle that he was able to stand up for himself and had a decisive character. This was more than enough to make him join his army, the heir believed, and extended his hand to the elf. And then another flashback began. Wood no longer remembered what his parents looked like. He was too young. One day, when he went too far into the forest and was left alone, a demon caught him. Like other prisoners, he was thrown into prison and forced to rot there. From then on, his whole life was a living hell, and the slave no longer hoped to ever become free. So Khan's words made the deepest impression on him and were imprinted on his soul. Tears began to flow from the elf's eyes, because he did not believe that he could follow the one he had chosen as his companion. Khan immediately established that their relationship was not that of master and servant. "Now they will be comrades," he said, and helped Wood to his feet. It was time to leave the demon cave. When they emerged from the cave, they gazed long at the night sky and the sparkling scattering of stars. Many had never seen anything more beautiful in their lives. The tribe decided to follow their liberators and continue to help each other. Khan didn't object. He was looking for reliable allies and was glad to have the elves, since he hadn't been able to get along with the earth demons. At first, he was a little worried about how the former captives would behave in freedom, but, protected by nature itself, they quickly adjusted. Since they had already experienced hell, they took all other hardships lightly. It would never be as hard as it was, the elves understood. A couple of days later, when they set up camp, Rin immediately established a hierarchy as her demonic nature demanded. Since Wood was a newbie, she told him to listen to them in everything. Ceres suggested that they first find a river, and the young elf did not immediately understand why. But he immediately pointed them in the direction of the nearest body of water, which he felt. Here, the hierarchy of usefulness for the master, so carefully constructed by Rin, cracked again, because Wood turned out to be quite capable. Can wanted to know why they needed the river and asked Ceres about it. "The thing is that constantly walking is too tiring," said the red-haired witch, "and it would be better for them to tame someone." Animals were easiest to find near water, and Rin immediately suggested riding a dragon. Ceres immediately snorted grumpily. At least here they could find a unicorn because dragons were extremely rare. The future demon lord agreed with the plan, and the ponies went in the direction Wood indicated. Even in the desert, at the bottom of the gorge, there was a stream flowing, around which a whole oasis grew, in which a couple of unicorns grazed. The sensitive animals immediately became wary as soon as they heard the noise, and began to look around with their goat eyes. They immediately ran away when a winged monster appeared from the water. Rin kept going on and on about the dragon, even though Ceres had told her they weren't around here. Meanwhile, a traveler in a white cloak discovered a survivor in the city of demons. Somehow he managed to survive the massacre, but was trapped under rubble, and now he was begging to be saved. Saint Curdley assessed the extent of the destruction. She did not care at all what happened here. Their white squad had split up the day before when her tracking magic stopped working. She herself did not understand what was happening because she discovered demons in several places at once. A surprising number of Hal's offspring survived. It was necessary to find out which of them was Kella. But the saint had no way to do this, and the squad could not catch everyone one by one either. Killian didn't argue. They had no choice anyway, and all the demons had to be destroyed. Since Curdley was the only one who could track Call, she had to go after him. The saint agreed because she could quickly teleport once, so they decided to give her an heir, and they themselves could deal with the other demons. The saint, as usual, agreed indifferently. Nothing had bothered her for a long time. Circles of powerful magic lit up in her eyes, and without further ado, the saint activated the spell. At that very moment, she literally evaporated before everyone's eyes. And Killian called on everyone to start hunting demons and grinned maliciously. Kel's energy was felt in the ruined city of earth demons, meaning he could be passing by. The demon, hearing the name of the heir, began to curse him and said that it was he who destroyed their entire tribe. Then the saint wanted to know in which direction Hal's son was heading. But the foolish demon could not know anything about this, and again asked for help. At that very moment, emptiness burst into his mind, faster than the pain signal could penetrate his brain. Such was the saint's help in freeing the creature that had renounced the Lord from torment. "There is only one road to the useless," she said, seeing off the sinful soul to heaven. She had no choice but to follow the faint trail. Looking up, Curdley strained her senses again, as if listening to a whisper from the heavens. Meanwhile, the hero and his companions reached a valley in which a fast mountain stream flowed. The elven sense of smell turned out to be a real miracle. They reached the river a few days later, using wood skills. Rin immediately jealously told the elf not to become arrogant. Can suggested that they first get something to eat. They couldn't find anything in the desert and were eating their meager supplies. Then the maid promised to quickly catch some fish. There were quite a lot of red fish splashing in the water, and Wood caught them faster than Rin could finish speaking. Using the power of water, the elf changed the flow of the river and easily threw the fish onto the shore. His abilities were impressive. The unfortunate maid again felt a pang of jealousy and winced with displeasure. She wanted to show off her fire-making skills, but Cirrus dealt with it instantly with magic. Realizing her complete uselessness, the maid retired to frustrate herself on the sidelines. Later, everyone ate their fill of fried fish and again praised Wood for his good work. Only Rin didn't eat, clearly sad about something, and Can noticed this. She said she wasn't hungry, and Cirrus immediately grabbed her portion of fish for herself. Can already understood what was going on and suggested looking for some fruits to add to their diet, and Rin immediately volunteered to help. Wood wanted to help the maid, but the hero prudently stopped him and said that Rin could handle it herself. Inspired by the fact that she could be relied upon, the maid ran into the forest to pick mushrooms and berries. Ceres immediately chuckled at such simplicity. At the same time, she praised the heir for his attentiveness and sensitivity. The guy justified himself by saying that he wanted something sweet. Wood promised to find the unicorns that lived here, and Can seemed to be inspired by the idea of catching a dragon, although the red-haired witch indignantly replied that there were none here. Meanwhile, a delighted Rin ran into the forest, energetically looking under every bush. She noticed a tree with juicy apples and ran up the stone boulders next to it, already imagining how she would delight the master with her find. They were apples of paradise, red, perfectly shaped, and smelling of honey. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet shook and the girl screamed. A shadow of worry crossed her face as she looked down and froze. What she had mistaken for a stone through her carelessness turned out to be nothing less than a dragon's head. Rin turned paler than snow and screamed piercingly throughout the area. Wood told his companions that he could feel the power of the earth. It was beyond words. It was as if he could see nature at a certain distance. Can immediately imagined looking at the map and thought that there was some similarity. This ability was perfect for searching underground, Ceres said. True, intuition had its limitations. It only worked over short distances, so Wood didn't know how useful it would be. In theory, it was possible to increase the radius through training, and there was one way for them. To do this, it was necessary to absorb the clairvoyant stone of a dragon that had lived for 1,000 years, which would expand the radius of the elf's senses hundreds of times. It was indeed an impressive development, Khan agreed. Ceres immediately grumbled that finding a dragon was not an easy task, much less killing it. She didn't yet know that Rin had found the dragon while simply walking in the forest. Can asked the witch if dragons were really as strong as he said. These creatures are at the top of the food chain. And on top of that, dragons hate demons, she said. Only a few people who had strong wills were able to tame dragons. Khan was disappointed that the only ones who could get the dragon were the pathetic humans, as if he had forgotten that he himself was one of them. The witch chuckled and said that she did not want to talk about the nature of dragons. But it would be good to get the stone of clairvoyance, the heir said thoughtfully. Ceres gave up on everything. They wouldn't be able to find the dragon anyway, so there was no point in worrying about it. And as soon as Kanu agreed, they saw Rin running in complete terror from the dragon, screaming throughout the valley. The dragon was also huge, which caused everyone a lot of surprise. Before they had time to come to their senses, they began to run away as fast as they could. Khan scolded the witch for her misinformation about the rarity of dragons. Meanwhile, Saint Curdly also entered the valley when she heard the unmistakable roar of a dragon. The four fugitives hid behind a rock, not wanting to become a snack for the dragon. As soon as he disappeared behind the trees, Ceres began to hiss angrily at Rin, because the huge, ferocious dragon did not look much like the ripe fruit she had gone to get. Wood immediately assessed the size of the monster. It had definitely lived for more than 1,000 years. The 1,000-year-old dragon must have had a clairvoyant stone, Saint Curdly agreed with the elf. Can was glad that someone was thinking in the same direction as he was, but the joy did not last long. The whole company stared in amazement at the unexpected phenomenon. Ceres was the first to recognize who was in front of them and jumped up from her seat in horror. When Khan realized that this was the saint from Talcon, he too was alarmed by the fact that they had been discovered. The entire squad belatedly raised their weapons to fight, preparing to fight to the death. Curdly was known for her cold-blooded cruelty, and her presence here was terrifying. Can had so hoped for a quiet life after escaping from the demon castle, but now he felt like a hunted animal. However, the saint suddenly declared that there was no point in them fighting. Moreover, Ceres, as a traitor to Talcon, was well aware of the saint's capabilities. At any moment, Curdly could destroy them all with one spell and began to gather magic in her hand. The heir asked the red-haired witch if this was true, and she regretfully admitted that their opponent was extremely dangerous. Without a doubt, the saint was stronger than all of them put together. The squad wavered. Rin nervously asked what they should do now. Seeing that they did not attack, the saint put forward her demands to surrender without a fight and follow her. And then they will live, for some time for sure, if they behave well, she added at the end. Can immediately asked where exactly she wanted to take them. The target was, of course, Killian. Curdly voiced her ultimatum. This news was even worse, and Ceres cursed angrily when she learned that Killian was already on his way. The commander's will was her decree, so Curdly intended to bring Kel Kaladin to him. One way or another, the guy was facing death in any case, The only difference was delaying the inevitable, and he understood this perfectly well. Then the saint made it clear that she could deliver their cool corpses as well. The boy gritted his teeth in anger. All he wanted was to live freely in the magical world, but now he had to die a miserable death at the hands of his enemies. It would have been better to accept the fight immediately than to wait for who knows what while he went after the saint. And then Khan fired the first shot, determined to fight with all his might, do or die. Curdley instantly summoned a magical barrier without even whispering a spell. Cirrus joined the heir's volley and also attacked with demonic magic. Wood also tried to work with her. Although he voluntarily joined the squad and was not a direct enemy of the people, he understood perfectly well that no one would spare him. The saint did not flinch under the blows. Her protective dome withstood all attacks. Rin rushed into close combat. She was still burdened by the fact that she had turned out to be completely useless to the master and did not want to die without having done anything. But even her claws failed to penetrate the absolute dome. The red-haired witch screamed at Rin to go back immediately. The saint indifferently collected magic in her hands. With a feeling of complete superiority, Rin felt pressure and threat, so she stepped back. And at that very moment, a glacier with razor-sharp, hard edges appeared in the valley. The maid took damage and fell to the ground, and the saint already crossed her fingers for the next spell, intending to kill all the demons one by one. It was area effect magic, a snowstorm. The saint flew into the air, and from there had an excellent angle for shooting. There was no point in running, so Cirrus raised her protective dome and ordered everyone to take cover under it. Dozens of ice arrows rained down on her barrier, filling the valley with a terrible roar. Can looked at the maid and asked her how she was. The girl almost burst into tears from her helplessness. Again, she could do nothing. But now was no time to cry because Cirrus reported that the dome would not hold for long. The heir suggested removing the saint's spell so that they could get at least a minute's respite. But the skill levels were too different, so the witch could not compete with the saint in magic. Her ice spears seemed endless, as did her mana reserves, and defeat looked inevitable. Can was thinking hard about what to do. Seeing how the dome was thinning, his heart was beating wildly. All of them, except perhaps Wood, showed signs of anxiety and panic, not knowing what to do. The boy desperately searched for a way out, forcing himself to think hard. But such battles must be prepared for long before they happen. Then he remembered the creature in his subconscious, the invisible ally who had already helped him once, and perhaps would help him again. Straining all his strength, Khan called upon the dark entity. There were no other options left. Ceres didn't understand what the heir was planning and told him not to move, otherwise the shield would crack even faster. The boy screamed piercingly, demanding the impossible, releasing Hal's energy. At the same time, the dragon heard the noise of the battle and turned in their direction. The saint also felt the changes in the guy, and realized that he could only use the power of the demon lord when he exerted himself greatly. Now she understood why she couldn't pinpoint his location. His power was unstable. "He's finished anyway," the terrifying woman said in an indifferent tone. Unfortunately for Khan, he was never able to penetrate his subconscious, and he did not understand why. He believed that he had to immerse himself in this state when he was between life and death. The dome could collapse at any second. Cirrus had exhausted all her strength to support it. When it cracked, an ice storm descended on the group of escapees. Can could only look into the face of danger and knew that it would all end now. However, at that very moment, the sky darkened above the fugitives, and clouds of dust rose into the air, stirred by the dragon's flapping sails. Its back protected the small detachment from complete annihilation. The mighty beast looked at them with huge amber eyes but without malice. The saint was also surprised by such a change that suddenly intervened in their battle. The dragon was a very dangerous opponent to be dismissed so easily. After this, the beast quickly landed and approached Kanu with its muzzle. When he touched the dragon's thick skin, he was instantly plunged into its memories, and another heartbreaking flashback began. In these images, Khan recognized Kel's mother, who sat on the back of a dragon, like a stormborn. Then he saw them splashing in the water, which made it clear that the relationship between the future queen and the dragon was more than friendly. It felt like the memories were filled with both joy and warmth, and the bitterness of regret. "Run, fools," the dragon told them mentally. Can was amazed that he heard it in his head. Then the dragon spat something right into his hands. When he looked closely, the guy noticed that it was a small red ball, a pearl. "The stone of clairvoyance," the dragon explained to him, and turned away from the boy. Can asked why the dragon was giving away such a treasure, but there was no time for explanations. He had to hide his power and run away from here as quickly as possible, the dragon said, mentally. But that would mean that the unexpected ally was left here to die. The dragon growled and ordered to hurry. He had already decided everything for himself. A stream of scorching flame burst from his mouth towards the saint. She took refuge behind her reliable barrier, but found herself tied up for a while. She was amused by this cooperation between a dragon and a demon, which she observed for the first time. The heir had no choice but to accept this help. So, to the sounds of a firestorm, the whole group began to run away. Curdly thought about it. Everything that was happening provided rich food for this. She was not at all afraid of the flame from which the stone melted. The dragon's magic was very strong. He did not stop firing and continued to hold the Holy One. Although she couldn't move to the side, she could still use powerful magic. And a huge magic circle appeared in the sky above the dragon. In one instant, the saint created an entire iceberg, a large block of ice. She opened her eyes wide, filled with the glow of mana that flowed through her, and brought down all that power on the dragon. The boulder was rapidly approaching, threatening to crush him like a bug. But the dragon did not run away, intending to keep the saint here as long as possible. His entire long life flashed before his eyes, and he began to remember the best moments. The earth shook as the iceberg fell from the sky like a meteorite. The battle was over. Even the mighty dragon could not resist the holy power, and she came closer to him to watch him die and ask why he intervened. The saint reached her hand towards the dragon's head to take his memories before he died. But dragons were also magical creatures, and only the Dovahkiin could take their souls. His whole body turned into flames that fluttered in the wind. "Stupid, greedy people will pay for what they once did," he said, after which he disappeared, leaving a coal-black shadow on the ground as a reminder of his once former power. The saint's snow-white face returned to its indifferent expression. It seemed that even if the whole world were on fire, she would not flinch. What worried the saint even more was that the heir of the demon lord had fled, hiding his presence. This caused her some inconvenience, but the saint was still confident that sooner or later she would catch call. Whispering a spell, she released dozens of magical butterflies into the sky. Meanwhile, the fugitives took refuge behind a large rock. The red-haired witch couldn't hear the conversation between the heir and the dragon, so she was perplexed why the one who wanted to have them for breakfast suddenly began defending them. However, she did note that the monster appeared at the same time Khan unleashed the power of the overlord. Then the heir explained to them that he had seen the memories of a dragon who had known his mother. Dragons don't usually get along with demons, so Rin was surprised that such an alliance was possible. There was no answer. From fragmentary memories, Khan caught only love and bitterness. Later, he showed them the dragon's precious gift, the Stone of Clairvoyance. This beast gave them everything he had, and even his life, striking them with his devotion. So, in fact, they were saved by the demon queen herself, Cirrus concluded. Khan clutched the dragon stone in his hands, wanting to know what kind of relationship he had with Kel's mother. But that secret went to the grave. In any case, the clairvoyance stone appeared at the right time for him, and he gave it to Voodoo. Ceres grumbled grumpily that they had the entire squad of white Talkin on their tail. Luck was the last word. Wood looked at the jewel in his hands. It was an exceptional thing, and he doubted that he was worthy of it. But Khan had no doubt. No one else could use this stone anyway, and with it their ally received a key ability. The elf agreed and swallowed the pearl, nearly choking in the process. He immediately started shaking and felt like everything inside was burning like fire. And then Elf saw the dragon's memory, because there weren't many heartbreaking flashbacks in this manga. Ever since his childhood, humans had been experimenting on the dragon. What they did and why remained a mystery, but the dragon was in great pain. The experiments took place every day in an endless series, and it all resembled hell. Years passed, generations changed, and his body was still torn to pieces, then healed, and experiments continued. Centuries of pain and confinement had shaken the dragon's mind. His senses had become dulled. He had become accustomed to pain and no longer paid attention to it. Dragons live a long time, and the wait for death dragged on. It seemed like an eternity, but one day the human palace began to shake from explosions. Turk Keldon, the most bloodthirsty demon lord, burst into the city, sowing death and chaos. The fire and destruction allowed the dragon to emerge to the surface, and he finally found freedom. Without looking back, the dragon fled from that place, not wanting to be anyone's prisoner anymore. Then, for the first time, he felt what it was like to soar freely in the sky and feel the wind under his wing. The dragon began to search for his relatives. Having told about the cruelty of people, the dragon suggested that the others help the demons in their fight, and thus take revenge. But no one listened to her words. Proud and selfish creatures, the dragons thought about themselves more than about others. and did not want to get involved in other people's squabbles. Moreover, they already enjoyed allied relations with people and did not want to violate them. Not many people knew or wanted to know that for people they are nothing more than tools to achieve goals. People were only interested in strength, and for this they studied dragons. They needed magic, dragon organs, and so on. This was not a relationship between friends, but the situation of a man and livestock. No one believed this dragon. No one wanted to see the truth. Besides, the relatives were already at enmity with the demons. Among the demons, mistrust of the dragon race also grew, and he was forced to leave their lands. This dragon could not find a place for itself, neither among people nor among demons, nor among its own kind. So he flew far away into the wild lands and lived there in complete solitude. Not understanding his place in the world and his purpose, the dragon was very sad. He didn't know why he was born, and for what purpose, and how he should live on. In endless darkness and complete loneliness, he simply slept, waiting for his death. Until one day the dragon was found by Calista, a little girl from the demon race. In the surrounding chaos, people and demons ravaged each other's cities and villages, and there was nothing surprising about orphans and wanderers. By some strange logic, the child began to call the dragon Mom, which greatly surprised him. But the little horned creature simply wanted to survive. With a scream, Mother Calista threw herself into the arms of a terrible beast the size of a mountain. The dragon froze in place but did not reject the child. He tried to quietly explain the difference, but Calista didn't want to listen and didn't let go of the dragon. That day, the dragon realized that he seemed to have found the reason for his existence. Using memory magic, the dragon saw Calista's life, and in many ways they shared a similar fate. And so began the flashback within a flashback of the second level. If the dragon was tormented by humans, then Calista was tormented by demons, among whom was a cruel group of priests, the Tarsica. They acted independently of the others. In their research, they studied the magic of dragons and also conducted many experiments on them, all for the sake of subjugating these proud beasts because they saw them, first and foremost, as a formidable weapon. Calista was also a dragon, and as soon as she hatched from the egg, they began to conduct bloodthirsty experiments on her that are completely unnecessary for real scientists. From birth, Calista had a talent for magic and could transform into human form, which was the most difficult magic for dragons. That is why the priests of Tarsic chose her for experiments. Dragons are amazing creatures. They are created by magic and understand it better than others. In constant pain and despair, Calista discovered the path to knowledge and gained the magic of teleportation. In an instant, she simply disappeared, after which she wandered for a long time in complete solitude. Until she met another dragon, that's why she mistook him for her mother. Their meeting was a mere coincidence, but it could be considered fate. After everything they had been through, they could no longer consider each other strangers. Pain had bonded them more closely than family. The dragon commanded them to call him Master. Calista happily agreed and raised her hands to the sky. The Master sounded almost like her mother, so the girl really liked it. Despite the dragon's displeased grumbling, he taught her everything he knew about how huge and dangerous the world was around them, how dragons and people live, what to be wary of, and where it's best not to go. Together they learned to use dragon magic. We flew to distant lands and time flew by quickly and unnoticed. Unlike previous days, these were filled with light and warmth. The master was grateful to his student and once said so. Nothing special, but every living being needed a meaning to exist. Calista grew quickly and already looked like a young girl. The master took pleasure in watching her grow up like his child. Every moment spent with her gave him happiness that cannot be described in simple words. These feelings were able to melt the ice in the heart and dispel the darkness of centuries of pain and suffering, which were forgotten like a bad dream. It was a wonderful life in which they had each other, but changes came when they least expected them. One day, something shook the dragon's consciousness so that his whole body shuddered. Calista worriedly asked the master what was happening to him, and then the master suddenly asked her who she was, as if he saw her for the first time. Man or demon demanded to be identified as master. Calista didn't understand anything and became even more worried. Man or demon, he must be destroyed. The dragon roared and breathed his flame. Calista was horrified by this and screamed, not knowing what to do. All the dragon wanted was to live a long, happy life with Calista. But centuries of pain and suffering had left far deeper marks than they imagined. The dragon's body was deteriorating, and his mind was clouded. Calista couldn't believe that the one who had replaced her father and mother had suddenly forgotten her. Fortunately, the madness did not last long, and the master partially regained his memories. The girl asked the master if he recognized her now. There was still anxiety in her eyes. The dragon asked for forgiveness. He did not want to attack his pupil, and did not know what came over him. Then he realized that for the safety of Calista, he had to stay away from her. And so, before he finally went mad, he rushed away. Leaving the young girl alone, she looked for him for a long time and cried all the time from grief. The dragon didn't explain anything to Calista. She wouldn't have understood anything anyway. Then he found a cozy corner and, immersed in warm memories, began to wait for his moment. It was incredibly sad to feel the memories fade and disappear. He was fading away and was surrounded by emptiness, as if he had lost something important. But he didn't know what. But one day the dragon sensed a familiar force, one that radiated love and bitterness, and followed its trail without thinking. This smell came from an unfamiliar young man, but it was unmistakable. The energy of the precious student. The dragon was left with only one memory of their first meeting. Having quickly assessed the entire situation, the dragon no longer doubted what to do next. He saw someone with Calista's energy in danger and instinctively intervened. But instead of his child whom he remembered, the dragon saw another child. And he still defended him because he thought it was right. In an instant, the dragon realized that this guy was Calista's son. The dragon saw an image of his beloved daughter becoming a mother, although she had a strange approach to raising her own children. Calista loved her child, so the dragon decided to protect him by sacrificing himself. He thanked Calista again for the fact that his memories had not disappeared senselessly and without a trace. It was nice to see her child at the end of his life, as if he had met her again. As he said goodbye, the dragon thought about how much he loved his daughter. When this double flashback finally ended, the elf was moved to tears and fell to his knees, unable to withstand the onslaught of melodrama. Hundreds of years of life flashed by in an instant, so Wood quickly forgot everything he saw, as if he had woken up from a dream. This dragon died happy, he told the others, forgetting to tell the demon lord that his mother was a dragon. Although they did not see the dragon's death, according to Wood, he was already dead, which meant the saint had finished him off, Can realized. Unfortunately, the dragon's memories quickly faded from Wood's head, so he couldn't tell them anything. The red-haired witch was extremely annoyed by this, because the elf himself had just been crying his eyes out. But it might take some time to unlock the abilities, the elf told them. At worst, nothing would change, he added. And Rin immediately stated that he still had to learn everything. Can agreed. There was no choice. They just had to wait until the elf's abilities awakened, but they did not know when they would encounter the White Tulkun again. They definitely needed a safe place to hide. Can asked Cirrus for a map and looked at it. The land of demons and the land of humans each occupied its own continent. The human one was a little larger and seemed to encompass the demon lands at the edges, and the narrow isthmus that connected the continents was the place where the friends were at the moment. Based on this, Khan decided that it would be best to head south. Rin didn't understand why they shouldn't go deeper into the demon lands. But the boy already understood that his father had not sent him to Arsol for nothing. His meeting with Cirrus was also part of the former ruler. With the king's castle fallen, Hal foresaw that the entire continent would be under threat of human invasion. Cirrus agreed with him. After Hal's death, not only the elite squad attacked the demons, but all the other military squads decided to exterminate the defenseless demons. Rin countered that at a time like this, they should, on the contrary, gather the demons' strength and fight back. However, this was hardly possible. Even the Earth demons branded Kel as a coward who fled the battlefield. He did not have enough authority to lead the remnants of the demons. The others must have been of the same opinion, and Khan himself understood that he still lacked the strength. Rin remembered that Cirrus had significant power, but for all demons she was an enemy, and only her father could prove otherwise. For many years she served in Tolkien's squad and destroyed demons. It is unlikely that anyone will forgive or forget that. The heir decided that in this case they first needed to equip a base, and then he could work on his reputation. He wanted the demons to follow him of their own free will, and decided to prove his strength first. The hero's small retinue unanimously supported his idea to show everything he was capable of. When he achieves great success, all the demons will believe in him, and thus he will become the Demon King. It took time to strengthen the position and develop a plan of action, and it was decided to build an underground base in the south. And again, everyone enthusiastically supported him. Except for Wood, the elf was distinguished by his worldly calm. Now, Can had reliable, loyal friends by his side. But behind him, bloodthirsty monsters were chasing him with unimaginable strength. It was too dangerous to face someone like Saint Curdley. More information was needed. Remembering everything he had experienced, the guy came to the conclusion that this world resembled a game. From magic spells to the names of monsters, Everything seemed very familiar. Perhaps there was some connection between this world and his past life. Khan intended to take advantage of his current status as the heir to obtain everything he needed to develop. Knowledge of the past should have helped him develop a survival strategy, and so he would win. He believed that it was not worth even settling for less. Meanwhile, on the other end of the continent, the demon genocide continued. Even though they cried out for mercy and were ready to serve people, they were still exterminated. They did not spare even those who had already surrendered without any fight, which caused despair among the remaining living demons. The long-eared warrior quickly silenced everyone. Human policy toward demons was very simple: free the lands for settlement. Therefore, Tolkien's squad was busy setting fire to villages and driving the demons away into the mountains and forest. Meanwhile, Killian received a message from the saint that the dragon had helped the heir of the demons under mysterious circumstances, and he was able to escape. She also said that she found traces of Khal on the border of human territory in the demon lands. The saint sent butterflies to search for the fugitives. All that remained was to wait for the results. Killian had no doubt that the heir would not venture into the demon lands engulfed in flames, which meant that now they had to join Curdly. The long-eared warrior objected that there were still many demons left here, but Killian urged her to remain calm. Not a single demon would leave them alive, he declared in the voice of an executioner. Even if it was an hour earlier, he had to destroy the family of those who killed his brother, said the commander, and grinned maliciously. On the other side of the world, Khan said at full speed, the wind blowing in his face. They had been moving south for a week now, gradually climbing higher in latitude, which made the surrounding area noticeably colder. The fugitive squad was lucky enough to never encounter Tolkien. The hero wanted to continue to avoid contact with them, at least until he is completely ready for this meeting. Wood's tamed unicorns were of great help to their cause, but then the squad suddenly stopped. The noble beasts that had carried them without rest for so many days refused to move on. These animals couldn't survive in the area they'd reached, and it was decided to let them go home peacefully. The detachment had almost reached their destination anyway. Wood thanked the horses and said goodbye. The pack quickly galloped away from the deep snow, under which it was difficult to find food. It was so cold that not only people but even demons would not venture that far, and therefore, it was an ideal place, Can believed. With cheeks reddening from the cold, he suggested finding a convenient place for a base in these lands. However, Saint Curdly, who had sent out her drones everywhere, had already spotted 4 unicorns. She was observant enough to notice that these creatures loved warmth and rarely went that far, and there were just enough of them for the fugitive demons to handle. The travelers reached the sea, where across the bay rose a lonely mountain with steep slopes, washed by waves on all sides like an island. These mountains had natural caves, and one could take refuge in them. Can asked Wood to find out if there was someone inside, a monster or a person, but the elf replied that his inner gaze responded only to nature. On the shore of the bay they found dilapidated boats, which led them to assume that no one had lived in this wilderness for a long time. The island was just a stone's throw away, only 200 meters. The boats also looked reliable. The sea was calm, so they immediately set off for the other shore. The crossing was successful. The detachment did not hide the boat and simply left it on the shore. Very close by they found a cave with a very wide entrance not far from the shore. Ceres cast an illusion spell on the entrance so that no one would think to look for them there. The cave seemed to be inhabited, although it was empty. Can suggested taking a look around first. The deep passage ended in a fork, and the boy asked the elf to describe these paths. The 2 passages first widen, each leading to its own room, and then they connect again. The very last room is deeper than the previous ones, and has an exit to the outside on the other side of the island. Can suggested splitting up and meeting on the other side to scout the route. Ceres immediately volunteered to accompany the young heir of demons, but the jealous maid wanted the same thing and grabbed the guy from the other side. The tunnels could be unsafe, so the strongest members of the team had to split up, the maid said. Ceres quickly agreed and decided to go with Wood, much to Rin's delight. Surprisingly, it was light in the cave. Thanks to the stones of light, the red-haired witch recognized them because they were created by a very powerful magician, since they burned even in his absence. Here Ceres openly admitted that she still did not trust the elf. Even though they were in the same squad because Kella recognized him, the witch was not one to make friends easily. Wood nodded and meekly stated that he was ready to be a slave if she so desired. The red-haired witch didn't answer, but only looked meaningfully at the elf. She didn't like him anyway, and even more so because of his submissiveness. In another passage, Khan walked with Rin. At first she admired the light stones and even decided to study them, and then she began to protect him even from the treacherous protrusions on the ground. The maid was full of enthusiasm, still believing that she was not doing enough and wanted to correct this. However, at this point, a clot of mucus, resembling a living drop, jumped out at the heir's feet. He had only seen things like this in games, and he always wanted to touch them, so he was indescribably delighted. But before this could be done, Rin smeared the lump on the ground by stamping her foot, after which she began to furiously destroy the remains of the unfortunate slime. Then she turned to the master like a faithful dog who had destroyed the stick that was about to attack its owner. Can watched this silently, and only then realized that Rin was expecting gratitude. The only thing missing was an influential tale. Then he was forced to praise her, taking pity on the poor slime. Suddenly, the ceiling above them began to crack and fall. And then, from around the corner of the straight corridor, a stone golem of unfriendly appearance jumped out. The guy immediately told Rin to hide behind him, realizing that the maid was no use anyway and would only die in vain. But the brave and feeble-minded Rin decided that she could destroy this enemy just as easily. The red-haired witch's team was a little luckier. They came across treasures that looked expensive. Ceres immediately tried on the necklace just like a magpie and asked if it suited her. The elf agreed, though without much enthusiasm, simply wanting to please her. The redhead immediately regretted that Rin wasn't with her now. Her friend would certainly have supported her. Wood, however, had emotions at the level of stone and the same expressiveness on his gray face. Meanwhile, Rin almost went flat after being hit by a golem. She struck him with her blow, but did not leave even a scratch on the stone. And at that very moment she was thrown back against the wall, hitting it painfully. Can shouted to the maid that they would not prevail against the unarmed gatekeeper. But the stubborn Rin decided to prove the opposite at any cost and again rushed at the enemy. However, the result was even more devastating than last time. She felt her ribs breaking. Can was angered by such disobedience and recklessness and asked why she was behaving like this. But the girl still did not give up and got back on her feet. As a servant of the demon lord, she wanted to prove herself worthy and had to destroy this enemy. And we dive into another flashback to reveal the character's motivations. Back to the time when Rin first began serving Call. The king's youngest son, with tears in his eyes, said that he wanted to be friends with the servant. The father called this absurd. A servant is a servant, and ordered that a contract be concluded immediately. The boy with a soft heart had no choice but to obey. So he named Rin his first servant, and she was grateful for it. The very fact that he wanted to be her friend and saw her as more than just a slave made her happy. It was the first time they saw her as a person, and she stood for a long time next to Call's bed, watching him fall asleep with tears in his eyes. Rin vowed to help him become the greatest demon lord. Clenching her little fists, she decided to try her best. But time passed, and the gentleman turned into a crybaby coward, putting an end to this dream. Every time, because he couldn't fight back against his brother and sister, he was on the verge of death, and Rin herself could die along with him. She tried to be cold and strict in order to make the gentleman at least a little tougher, but he never changed his nature as a weakling who is afraid to offend a fly. Because she didn't have a protector, Rin also got bullied by the other maids. They fed her Termes poisoned food and mocked her with their jokes. The persecution continued all the time. The demons were merciless to those who could not fight back. Rin slept in the stable where no one could find her. But even there were those who bullied the poor, weak servant. These two didn't like the way Lord Termes looked at Rin, and they came to fix her face. Although the girl begged them not to do this, naturally no one listened to her. But that day she hated her master mattress. She came to his bedroom, thinking that if he was gone, then she would be gone too, according to the contract. So they could leave together and no longer suffer humiliation in this world. She heard him, but thanks to his endless regeneration, the prince survived. So nothing worked out for her, and she cried bitterly at the prince's bedside. He cried too, which made the maid even more angry. And from then on, she gave in and just went with the flow. But suddenly the gentleman changed dramatically, as if he had been replaced. He became a completely different person, and Rin herself changed along with him. The current him looked more like the future demon lord. So the maid was ready to fight for him with all her strength and without sparing herself. She hated herself for becoming a burden, so she stood up again and rushed towards the golem. Eventually, she managed to find a vulnerable spot on his neck and land a good blow there. Just like that, in one fell swoop, we managed to rip off the golem's head, after which he collapsed into a pile of rocks and Rin landed on the ground. Most of all, she didn't want to be useless, because she was afraid that then they would simply throw her away. Before Khan could answer her, the stone golem had gathered himself again and was ready to strike. The maid would have died, but Khan stepped forward and protected her. The guy hugged her and calmed her down, because every time he was in danger, she risked herself for him. So why should he abandon such a good and faithful servant? Rin's breath caught in her throat, and she felt like she was in a Korean drama. The noble, handsome man promises her that he will never leave her and will not let her go. So she immediately started swimming. Two streams flowed from Rin's eyes and she gave in to her emotions. I had to lean on his strong male shoulder to come to my senses. The guy shared all the same memories as Kella, so he understood that Rin's feelings were more sincere. And for the sake of their future, he thought that he had to make her the strongest servant. In another part of the cave, Cirrus continued to follow the trail of treasures that were scattered around. The fact that no one had collected them, although they were lying in plain sight, did not alert anyone. The red-haired witch was delighted with the find and decided to pick everything up to show to Rin later, despite the elf's quiet warnings. Ceres snorted with displeasure, saying that she wasn't forcing him to take anything, since he was indifferent to everything anyway. Wood asked in surprise if she really didn't know, or if she was just pretending not to know. Ceres stared at the elf in bewilderment. She really didn't understand what he was talking about. But soon she felt on herself that the jewelry she touched turned out to be a binding trap, and at that very moment the spells were activated. And then from the depths of the hall appeared a spider, the guardian of the cave, a creepy-looking mutant. It was obvious that the treasure belonged to him and was just a convenient bait, Wood said indifferently, as if it did not concern him. The witch was indignant that the elf knew everything and did not stop her. But the hissing of the monster behind her interrupted their argument. Wood decided that Cirrus should have understood everything anyway, so he did not interfere, but immediately decided to help her. The tree roots that burst from the ground protected the witch from the blow. From the very beginning, the elf thought that the wise sorceress had a plan. He spoke in a completely simple tone, but the words still sounded like a mockery. Cirrus became nervous. She could have dealt with the monster in 2 counts, but the jewels prevented her from doing so, and in this position she could not summon a weapon. Now she could only trust voodoo, the witch realized, but she said out loud that everything was part of her plan, and she had deliberately allowed herself to be caught. All to assess the elf's strength, the witch quickly added, and Wood was surprised. Since she was being held by the web-bound gem, he had to hurry and free her, Wood realized. However, on the first attempt it was not possible to cut the bonds using brute force. Then the spider got tired of waiting for their actions and spat a poisonous green liquid at everyone. "This spider acid dissolves everything it touches," said the witch, and Wood quickly grabbed her and moved away. Despite the fact that he had been a slave all his life, he acted surprisingly harmoniously. But the ground under his feet was not fertile, and he could not call upon the roots. Ceres screamed that she could kill the creature with 1 blow, but she needed to free her hands. When the monster realized that he couldn't douse them with acid, he tried to reach them with webs. Wood dodged, obeying his natural instinct, but Cirrus was caught like a fly in a sticky net. The spider showed miracles of tactics. He was clearly aiming at the one who had the least chance of escaping. The monster's next step was to jump towards the witch, wanting to pierce her with a sharp claw. The red-haired witch cursed under her breath. She didn't want to die so stupidly at the hands of some monster. But at the last moment the elf stood up to protect her and covered Cirrus with his body, receiving a wound. As he had promised, Wood followed the order to do something. The dagger flashed and the spider howled as its sharp claw and paw were cut off cleanly. Then the elf pulled it out of his paw, and with its help broke the bonds, since it was part of the spider. Ceres was amazed on the one hand by Wood's resourcefulness, and on the other by his selflessness. He clearly risked himself without even thinking. But the evil creature did not disappear and attacked them again. She dug her razor-sharp claws into the elf's back. But Wood still did not run away and continued to cover the red-haired witch with his body. In a weak voice, he asked her to cover the master's rear. The witch was astonished by such sacrifice and could not answer anything. She was overcome with anger and fury at the pathetic insect that dared to attack her, and a magic wand appeared in her hand. At that very moment, the monster was engulfed in hellish flames and began to scream piercingly in pain. As soon as the creature died, the strangling bonds on its neck immediately broke. Ceres thought that Wood had taken them off and asked him how he did it. The elf replied that he had guessed that the magic of the fetters would not extend to the spider itself if it wanted to remove them, or was caught in its own trap. But if Wood had been wrong, they could both have died because of her stupidity, Ceres realized. But Wood didn't care about his own life at all. It was more important to him to carry out the order. Then Ceres plunged into another heartbreaking flashback and remembered the times when she was still studying in Tolkien. She allowed herself to be wounded in order to grab the enemy's swift blade and win the battle. The witch swung her sword and in an instant turned the tide of the battle, ending it. The instructor appreciated her tactical move, even though it was associated with some risk. But for Cirrus, it didn't matter whether she survived or not. She fanatically followed the order to destroy the enemy. The instructor chuckled contentedly. He liked her stubbornness. The test was passed and the witch grinned. She had been to hell, where only madmen could survive. Wood always walked around with a sullen face, but in reality he was no different from her in the days of her youth, Cirrus realized, appreciating the elf anew. This kid risked his life to save her, so the witch said he passed. Now she acknowledged him as her comrade, and Wood's eyes widened in surprise. From now on he must fight for his life, Cirrus ordered him. The elf promised to try his best, and for the first time there was a glimmer of warmth between them. As agreed, they gathered together again in the large room. Both Rin and Wood were injured, but Cirrus quickly cast healing spells on them all. The red-haired witch scolded the heir for not protecting the girl, and for her receiving many wounds, but the maid stated that she volunteered for the fight. But Khan also made similar claims. There was not a single undamaged spot on the elf. Later, the friends discovered that they were each fighting their own unusual monster. Golem and Spider were not often found in the same dungeon, and it was strange, and it seemed like this place had some kind of secret. The interior of the cave reminded Kanu in some places of the Demon King's castle, just as gloomy and damp. But there were also traces of human architecture visible here. The witch and the heir left the wounded and went to examine everything. What worried them most was the statue standing in the middle of the hall with a stone sarcophagus lying next to it. Rin, who had a penchant for jewels, immediately decided that there was treasure inside. The red-haired witch, who learns nothing from life, immediately decided to examine the sarcophagus. But before she could do so, Khan noticed the statue's eyes light up and shouted at her to stop. He fired a blast of dense mana from the demon's bow straight at the statue's head. Khan immediately scolded the girls for their presumption when it became clear that this was yet another trap, and they had fallen into it so easily. At that very moment, the statue sent rays of goodness towards the red-haired witch, and she quickly had to dodge. Rin and Wood wanted to join the battle, but Khan told them to recuperate first. Otherwise, they would only get in the way. Wood obediently agreed and began the treatment. But the maid began to object. The elf only melancholically replied that he was simply following Cirrus's orders and taking care of his own survival. For him, everything in the world was extremely simple. Then the maid had no choice but to agree with him, and hope that during this time their master would not suffer. Khan began to distract the statue, and Cirrus ordered it to hit it directly on the body. But the statue had its own protective barrier that arrows could not penetrate. The witch threw a fireball at the enemy to test his strength. However, the effect was zero. The statue not only defended itself, but also attacked in response. Khan also became nervous, not understanding how the statue could use several spells at once. There were two options, Cirrus explained in the heat of battle. Either a powerful mage had cast the spells in advance, or there was something inside the sculpture that was performing magic right now. The heir asked Wood to examine the structure of the statue to determine its nature. The elf immediately confirmed that the statue was hollow inside. So, Khan realized, there was a high probability that someone was hiding inside. To destroy the statue, it was necessary to break the barrier. But Cirrus was already doing everything she could to protect herself from the rays of good. Suddenly, the walls of the cave came to life and began to move. A whole row of stone golems stood before Khan. At the same time, a huge spider appeared in front of Cirrus, a real mutant spider queen. There was a flash of purple and a quick spell was cast from the staff. However, it didn't work on the spider, due to good protection. The monster's reaction was also lightning fast, and he immediately counterattacked. Due to the narrowness of the cave, Cirrus could not use wide-range magic and simply destroy the monster with one blow. Khan was also pinned against the wall by a crowd of golems and could do little with his bow. He decided that he would quickly figure things out if he released Hal's mana. However, this will make him noticeable to the insanely powerful saint, who will immediately understand where they are and will have to go on the run again. The statue's eyes flashed again, but at that moment an idea came to the boy. As soon as the monsters appeared, the statue's magic disappeared, Khan noticed. Now, all her actions were aimed at subjugating the golems and the spider. As soon as Cirrus said that the statue needed to be destroyed, monsters immediately appeared. Perhaps their enemy felt threatened and therefore could change their battle tactics. Khan asked to buy him some time. He decided to destroy the statue at any cost. Cirrus agreed and immediately summoned more powerful magic from her arsenal. A wall of fire separated Khan from the golems, hiding him from view. The moment Cirrus stops casting his spell, the monster's control will weaken, but the barrier must also collapse, Khan decided, and delivered a powerful blow to the bottom of the sculpture. Debris fell and the boy fell into the hollow interior. Ceres saw this and was worried that he would get sick there, but she couldn't be distracted because the golems were pressing in from all sides. The spider crawled into the crack in the statue because only she could get through there after the intruder. Their enemies definitely had tactical combat skills. However, someone headed straight for the wounded, and Rin panicked. Wood realized that he would have to fight. Then the red-haired witch jumped up to them and covered them with her dome. She did not allow the wounded to be distracted from treatment. Her defense could withstand the onslaught of heavy blows from the golems for some time. All that was left was to wait and hope that Kella would cope completely. Looking closely at the top of the statue, Khan saw something strange there that had broken off the inner walls. He raised his bow to destroy this thing, thinking that this way he would stop the control. But before he fired, he himself was hit by a thick web of spit. A dense web pressed him against the wall, not allowing him to move. A hungry spider was already crawling in front of him. Khan heard cries for help from Ceres. She wouldn't hold out for long, the boy realized. But he had his own problems, and when he thought that he couldn't cope without Hal's strength, the shadow that lived there crept into his mind again. "What is he doing?" his voice asked when the guy found himself in a familiar place. The shadow was angry that he was being defeated by some pathetic monsters. Khan himself was angry. Last time he almost died, and the unknown ally didn't even show himself. Then the shadow told him to shut up and finally use the servant. Even a weak heir could control monsters with the help of the servant skill. At first, the heir thought that it was about the master-servant contract that he had entered into as a child and had recently terminated with Rin. But the shadow screamed furiously, calling him a fool, because it was about someone else. The blood of a demon lord flowed in him. All the rulers of the past possessed the power of a servant, and with a strong desire it could be awakened. This power allowed him to turn his opponents into slaves. All he had to do was give free rein to the greed that was sealed in his carpet. With it, those who were inferior in strength to the heir would begin to obey. He had to give in to his greed, assert himself, and subjugate the monsters before him. So the hero got another legal cheat in addition to all the others. And before the monster's sharp claws pierced him, he commanded the spider to obey with this power. Something resembling slots appeared in my head, one of the cells of which was filled with an image of a spider. Everything is just like in the games, thought Khan, and felt that he could control it. Now the treasure keeper spider belonged to him. Meanwhile, outside, Cirrus and the others were in serious trouble, her barrier held up by the witch's word of honor and obscene curses. Khan mounted the spider and shouted to the witch to be patient a little longer. To figure everything out, one spider was not enough for him. Khan wanted to pacify all the monsters, so he quickly approached the slime that stuck to the walls. Since this monster controlled the rest, there shouldn't have been any problems. As soon as the servant's skill worked, the battle ended immediately. The friends were surprised because they still didn't understand how much their heir had leveled up. Then Khan appeared riding on a spider, and everyone was even more surprised. In his hands, he held a slime that had found a home in a strong shell. Surprisingly, this little one turned out to be the master of the entire dungeon. And Khan was happy that he got the pet he wanted, and one that could also use advanced magic. Ceres hadn't heard of the power of subjugation, and it seemed to be reserved for the king's direct descendants. Now Rin also understood how His Majesty managed to control so many monsters. Having a dungeon master in his hands made it much easier to build his own, said a pleased Khan. He decided to immediately name the pet pebble, since it was completely covered in protection. Ceres began to complain that she didn't have such an ability and tried to summon it, but the cheats were only for the main character, the guy told her. Wood distracted them from their arguments and asked where all the other inhabitants of this place had gone, since an advanced magician capable of creating this place had been here. Judging by the appearance, this place has been abandoned for a long time. Its walls are clearly dilapidated. Or maybe they all died in battles with people, the witch added sadly. One way or another, the little slime was left alone. Although he had subjugated the younger monsters, Khan still didn't know what kind of creature was helping him, and he couldn't say anything about its motives. If this shadow hadn't appeared again, he would have died. For some time, the hero thought under what conditions this stranger could be summoned. But in the end, he didn't rack his brains for long, after which he announced the beginning of preparations for the construction of a great dungeon. Once Pebble submitted to him, Khan was able to control other monsters as well. To prepare for the arrival of the demon hunters, they posted feathered guards around the island. The main entrance was guarded by several spiders, but they were all needed simply to raise the alarm. The golems guarded the fork with their entire squad, and the spider mother now guarded the main hall. The chest under the statue contained various useful items, and Rin received 2 daggers. These artifacts strengthened her mana, making it denser, but she still needed to learn how to use them. Until now, the maid had relied only on the waves of mana from her hands. But once she masters daggers, her power becomes sharper and more dangerous. So Rin became inspired and decided that with this, she could protect the master from the white Talcon. Wood was given an old wooden shield and didn't mind it at all. There was still moisture inside the shield, as if the living force of nature had been preserved within it. Can didn't object, since the elf's well-developed instincts told him so. Ceres took the grimoire with the word Death Note written on the spine in white letters, hoping to find new spells in it. Can decided to arm himself with a sword and was choosing which one to take for himself. Rin offered him the one on the edge, since it felt like it had the most demonic power. Heaviness is good, thought the hero, remembering the classics. Heaviness is reliable. But Khan still chose another, even though this thin blade looked the weakest. This sword was similar to the one the guy used in the game, so it attracted the most attention. He felt as if he had regained an old friend and was pleased with his choice. Once the squad had divided up the gifts, they could finally begin construction. The terrain was barren, and materials were scarce. They decided to build by mixing earth, rocks, and water to create a building mass. Drawing on Wood's knowledge of natural materials and Ceres's magical engineering, they set to work. Thus, a dungeon was gradually erected, combining the techniques of the earth demons and the magicians of Arsal. Although it turned out to be quite simple, since they built it in difficult conditions, Khan completed everything according to his own design. It was the first and possibly the last time he built such a dungeon, but the guy simply enjoyed the process. He placed the stone in a golden cage, like a parrot, and asked if the pet was happy with the changes. He nodded contentedly, and this made the hero's mood even better. Now there were good conditions here to lie low and gather strength, hiding from Talcon. When the full moon rose in the sky, it illuminated a lonely island, around which butterflies made of light fluttered. Meanwhile, Lord Hayden set about restoring Arsal, and with the help of magic, things progressed quickly. They suffered great damage. An entire island state was burned down because the inhabitants got too carried away by the celebration. Hayden had no tolerance for excuses. Arsal was an ancient nation, so it was a great shame that one traitor and the heir of a demon lord could cause them such damage. The elder didn't know how this happened, and Hayden ordered the summoning of the 5 most powerful elemental mages. For them, he had power-up stones from the royal treasury. The elder wondered why they were equipping the mages if the White Talcon had already set out on this mission. But for now, the elite guard squad did not know where to look for fugitives and traitors. If Hayden and the mages had found them earlier, it would have washed away Arsal's shame. The elder expressed concern that if they started using the enhancement stones, there might be side effects. Hayden pressed the old man down with force. In their situation, they had to think about other side effects like the king's wrath, he stated firmly. He also reminded the old man that Arsal owed his prosperity to him personally, so they had to be grateful that they were still alive after all. Hayden needed a compelling reason for the king to continue supporting Arsal, which meant immediately addressing their vulnerable position. White Talcon would undoubtedly destroy the heir of demons if he met him, so Hayden's mages should have found the traitors earlier. Then, the commander of the magicians, Talui, approached Lord Hayden. He knew about the Lord's goal, and Hayden asked him who he was. The magician confidently declared that he was the one who would find Kel for him, which surprised the courtier. At this time, Khan was having lunch in his shelter for the first time, although he couldn't get used to his chair, which looked more like a throne. Rin immediately supported him, saying that the future demon lord had nothing to be embarrassed about. The dinner wasn't really up to par for a royal feast. They only had baked fish, and Kala needed a balanced diet, Ceres said, caring for her growing body. Rin immediately expressed her desire to continue searching for food. As always, her zeal was unbridled. But it was too dangerous to go outside. White Talcon could discover her, and then all their work would go to waste. At the same time, Khan was really tired of fish. He really wanted to eat meat and something else. Then Wood volunteered to catch some predatory beast, and the red-haired witch was surprised that they were there. During training, the elf came up with a way. The wooden shield he held contained life force, and it was possible to connect with it. The shield had sprouted roots, which the elf hoped to use to find underground animals. And Khan immediately realized it was something related to underground fishing. Khan was a good man, For the hunt to be successful, the roots must grow in peace and quiet, Wood explained to them. They had to wait a really long time. They spent 6 hours impatiently rubbing against this hole in the ground. But the wait was worth it, because suddenly a huge mole-like monster jumped out of the ground. Sirius praised the elf for the successful catch. It was worth the wait. For the first time, something resembling a blush appeared on Wood's face. He was quite flattered by the red-haired witch's praise, but judging by the beast's terrifying appearance, Khan doubted that it could be eaten. After all, he was an inhabitant of the earth who bought meat in a supermarket, in a more presentable form. Rin clearly felt like she was losing ground to the newcomer and was in danger of falling to the bottom rung of the hierarchy she had created. So, having grabbed the mole, the girl promised to quickly prepare a real dish out of it. But in reality, the maid hadn't had much to do with cutting up carcasses while she lived in the Lord's castle. And now she didn't know what to do. The mole turned out to be very durable and did not succumb to the usual cutting with the help of the aura around the hands. It would have been possible to ask the master to tear the thick skin, but the maid's pride did not allow her to do this. In her imagination, the master will immediately express his dissatisfaction with the useless servant. Rin immediately threw all these thoughts aside, they were too terrible. Then she remembered her recent acquisition, the daggers. These artifacts were capable of enhancing magic, and the girl took them into her hands. She focused her mana and sent it along the blade, surrounding the blades with an aura. It turned out that the power contained in the weapon was much greater than she had imagined. Unable to hold it back, she saw the mana dissipate, as if the daggers were drawing out her mana. Moreover, Rin couldn't throw them. The blades seemed to have grown to her hands. The situation was becoming dangerous because she could lose all her strength at once. Meanwhile, the red-haired witch studied her grimoire, which contained the basics of magic, created taking into account the peculiarities of the dungeon. At first she noticed simple spells, but between them there were words that Sirius had never encountered. And what confused her even more was that she could not determine the level of the mage who left this grimoire. Then they heard screams from the kitchen where Rin had gone, and everyone turned around anxiously. Wood volunteered to check, but the red-haired witch told him not to interfere, deciding that Rin could handle it herself. Even despite the elf's concern, he believed that the girl was simply cooking, respecting her intentions. Can also understood this without further ado. Sometimes intentions are more important than results, because only constant attempts to continue efforts lead to success. Rin was still valiantly struggling with the power of her artifact, trying to take control of it, and she quietly plunged into a flashback. Previously, she had only watched Call's classes from the sidelines. Everything always ended the same way. The heir either cried or gave in after receiving a scolding. The maid remembered every movement so that she could teach Call herself later if necessary. One of the lessons was devoted to methods of using a dagger, and the maid recalled the instructor's instructions. To control the magical dagger, one had to understand its essence. Otherwise, it would be useless, the professor told them. Rin wondered what the essence of the sword meant and remembered the instructions of another professor. She told them that formless mana would simply overwhelm the user. It needed to be concentrated and given form. Concentrate and formulate the mana, the maid understood. Mana had to be formed according to the essence of the dagger, suppressing the rampage of power. Rin strained herself to synchronize all the streams. The mana became sharper and denser around the blades, as if acknowledging its owner. Rin didn't try for herself. It was important for her to become stronger in order to protect her master from his enemies. Therefore, with particular fury, she plunged the blades into the mole's carcass. This time, everything worked out perfectly. The blades easily cut through the tough skin. The mana no longer rushed out, but became stable, rotating around the blade. Feeling a connection with the blades, Rin was delighted with her success. Quite a bit of time had passed, and Count himself began to worry, deciding to check on the maid, but Sirius insisted that he not interfere. And not in vain, soon Rin came out of the kitchen, holding beautiful steaks of meat on a cutting board, ready to be fried. Can immediately asked what was the reason for the scream they heard. The girl tried to pretend that she didn't understand what was being said, and became nervous. Sirius praised the maid. Rin did better than she even imagined, and it seemed that she had the talent to control the energy of the sword. The girl was very surprised to hear the praise. The witch's grimoire contained information about moles. If these animals reach the surface, they risk immediate death. But underground, their tough hide makes them invulnerable. So only those who can control the sword's energy can penetrate their defense. Rin was even more amazed. Now she understood why it was so hard for her. Even Wood appreciated her efforts, and the girl modestly noted that she had not done anything special. Having appreciated the difficulty of her work, Khan also praised the maid. Now they could eat well, he said, and declared that he was proud. For the first time, he praised her so directly for her efforts, and the maid blushed. Rin decided to live up to this praise, and from now on move forward relying only on her own strength, for his sake. Ceres looked with satisfaction at the changes in the maid. She was able to develop independently, and she realized that now the most important problem was herself. During the battle with the earth demons and the fight in the dungeon, she felt useless. The fact that she couldn't cast a large-range spell in a confined space was just a pathetic excuse. She needed to master magic that could be used in any environment. Remembering her father's instructions to look after Call, the red-haired witch plunged into meditation. All this time, the air saved them from the most dangerous situations, and now if the saint attacks them again, Ceres will not be able to cope. She was only on the 4th circle of power, while the saint was on the 6th. Therefore, the witch decided that she could not waste time and had to strengthen her mana, even in a risky and forbidden way. The earth ore provided a temporary boost at the cost of life energy, but Ceres was willing to do so to fulfill her father's will. She was ready to sacrifice her life and swallowed the stone. At that very moment, the grimoire next to her opened, and its pages began to turn over on their own. The book responded to her mana, and words that she could not decipher lit up before the witch. And then a powerful stream of light hit her, which was completely unexpected. The witch found herself in some kind of cave, the bottom of which was filled with some kind of red liquid. A certain entity appeared behind the witch, who immediately recognized her as the heir to the Demon King and said that it had been waiting for her for a long time in this circle of reincarnations. Ceres realized that the grimoire had been activated by her father's power and asked the stranger if she had once served Hal Calden. But she answered negatively, and now it was unclear why she reacted to the power of the Demon Lord. Then the stranger said that she served the only god of this world, Turk Calden. This was very surprising information. This witch belonged to the previous generation of rulers. Ceres still couldn't believe such a striking coincidence. Fate sometimes chooses its own path, the sorceress declared. Perhaps the thread of time itself determined their meeting, or simply the magic of the plot, which the author was unable to disguise. According to her, it turned out that this dungeon was created by Turk Calden. The Turk and his retinue visited many places, leaving traces everywhere so that those who came after them could better understand where to go next. Once again, Ceres was stunned that they had not ended up in this wilderness by chance. Then, she began to ask the witch to tell her what to do next, because her master had been killed. But the witch was only a magical image, a replica of a once-living person, and could only help the one who awakened her. There was no doubt her father was dead, the witch thought. She asked for help to overcome her 4th circle of mana. She needed the strength to protect the heir of Turk and Hal Calden. The sorceress liked Ceres's honesty, but she couldn't help her with that either. She could only rise higher with her own skills. In this same abyss lurked a deadly pain that was eating away at the body. What else could be hidden here, said the sorceress, and promised that if Ceres passed the test, her wishes would come true. The red-haired witch was ready for anything and immediately said that she could endure everything. The witch warned that she would experience pain equal to 14 years of life, and if she did not cope with it, she would die. The witch immediately thought about her father and the brother she had to protect. Therefore, she firmly stated that her body was created only for this purpose. If she could not protect Call, then her life would lose its meaning. She was ready to accept this pain with pleasure, which spoke of her very strange inclinations. The sorceress liked such persistence, and she promised to tear all of Ceres's mana into pieces and then reassemble it using her personal power. Pain pierced her at the same moment as black magic circles appeared. And then Ceres experienced pain and fear that she had never encountered before. It was a real test. Now all that was left was to wait and see how long she could hold out. The witch's face twisted into a painful grimace. Can was also practicing with his sword, but then he remembered that he hadn't seen Ceres for a whole day, so he decided to check on her. However, when he entered her room, he saw the witch surrounded by her barrier and clearly in bad shape. Can immediately dropped the meat and tried to cut the dome to let Ceres out. He shouted at the witch to come to her senses because she looked very bad, but Ceres did not answer, and her eyes remained empty. Meanwhile, a squad of white Avengers was already walking along the cold, wet sand. It was to this place that a group of unicorns brought Call's company, said St. Curdley, who was leading the company. But there were hundreds of islands near the coastline, and it was impossible to search them all. But Commander Killian didn't object and immediately grabbed his sword. It's even good that the fugitives took refuge here and not in the open. Just a little more, he added, and swung his sword. As soon as he struck, a devastating stream of power erupted from his sword. Even his own subordinates were amazed by his power, although the saint remained indifferent to this. Killian ordered them to split up and find where Kella was hiding. Inside their hideout, the boy was still trying unsuccessfully to reach the witch. She continued to weaken before his eyes, but he could not overcome this barrier. The witch was now the key link in their squad, and they couldn't afford to lose her. But then the hero heard the sound of an earthquake, even though there were only islands around. A noise outside the shelter attracted the attention of the feathered guards, and they flew over to take a look. There, on the ruins of the island, Commander Killian made his way. Pebble immediately reported the invasion to his master and raised the alarm. People with white hair and in white clothes. It was definitely Talkin's squad, the hero realized. They were found too quickly, and at the most inopportune moment. If they were found now, everything would be over, Khan had no doubt, and ran to the others. He ordered them to hide in the bunker immediately, and he reported that a white Talkin had been spotted near the shelter. It was unclear whether the Avengers knew where to look for them, but they still needed to hide in the bunker. Both the elf and the maid became nervous, now realizing who had just caused the earthquake. Without a doubt, it could only be Killian's magic, and they all ran towards the secret hiding place. Building this cache was a good idea, said Khan, pushing the heavy chest aside. At least they wouldn't be found right away, and as soon as they jumped inside, the guy closed the passage. Unfortunately, he couldn't do anything more, and Cirrus was still defending the dense barrier. Meanwhile, the leader of the Avengers jumped straight onto the island. He didn't need a boat, after which he made a superhero landing, cracking his knees. Here, he immediately felt the familiar smell of demonic energy. Pebble reported that Killian landed right next to the entrance to the dungeon. The white cloak and sword left no doubt that the greatest threat was approaching them. Rin was immediately horrified by this news. Khan realized that if Killian could see through illusions, it was only a matter of time before he got inside. And indeed, for an experienced swordsman, their childish trick was not a serious obstacle. The commander grabbed his sword again, thinking about simply blowing everything away in one fell swoop. Khan received a message from the stone. The enemy found the entrance and tensed up. At the last moment, Killian changed his mind about destroying everything. Otherwise, he would not be able to find the bodies and confirm the demon's death. If he had done that, then Did would have simply eaten him with his ridicule. So Killian decided to eliminate everyone with his own hands, and proudly walked inside without any fear. The enemy had entered the dungeon, the slime announced, and Khan perked up again. He had no choice but to mobilize all the monsters in the dungeon. The golems and spiders ran in a crowd to defend the passage. Khan didn't even try to make it look like an accident. Killian was surprised to see such a collection of monsters. It was not what you expect to see in one place. However, they were all destroyed by his power in an instant. Just one attack was enough, the hero realized. Their enemy was incredibly strong. He hadn't even managed to buy a little time, and now he was completely at a loss. At the same time, Killian reached a fork in the road and wondered which path to take. The commander simply tossed a coin and went with one of them. He had nothing to fear anyway. He could always go back and check the second one. Unfortunately for Khan, the enemy chose the path that led closest to Cirrus, and now the witch, trapped in the Dome of Pain, was in danger.